Welcome to the Thor Hour. I'm your host, John Thorhauer. Join me in conversations as I explore the talents, passions, and curiosities from Frederick, Maryland and beyond. My guest today is Nicholas Fett, the CTO of Tellor, a cryptocurrency company that enables data access for smart contracts. An economist by training, Nick formerly worked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the CFTC. Join us as we talk cryptocurrencies, blockchain, NFTs, and even a little about Web3. You can get this episode by watching on YouTube or listening on your favorite podcasting app. I've provided timeline bookmarks in the show notes so you can quickly and easily navigate the interview. Please see the show notes for the timeline, links to this episode, and guest links. And now, without further ado, Nick Fett on the Thor Hour. All right, Nick, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, really glad you could make it. I actually stumbled upon you by going to, when I first started thinking about doing the show, I thought, well, I'm going to go to Tech Frederick's site, just kind of see who's around, tech companies. And your company name stuck out. It was like, and I couldn't even tell you, well, I can tell you one reason why, but reading all these company names and then I just see a company name, one word, Tellor, lowercase. I'm like, well, that looks interesting. Click on
Nice.
that. And so,
branding has worked.
What's that?
I said branding has worked.
Yeah. And so I went there and, kind of looked at your company. I was like, oh man, I didn't know that there was a crypto company in Frederick, which to me in and of itself was really interesting. So I was really, really happy when we got to talk and that you were, willing to come on the show. So thanks for doing that.
Of course.
So I'll just say up front, our audience is going to be probably less technical. Definitely less technical than I've listened to a few of your interviews, and your interviews, you're starting, a level. Usually those shows are people who are knee deep, right? So our audience is probably, from people I've talked to actually about this particular
they all
episode.
own crypto, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of them are excited, hoping to gain some understanding, and so that's hopefully our goal here is to just.
Do you have to give any financial disclosures?
Well, so I was just going to say, if anybody wants to, if I somehow give any advice that actually sounds like it might mean something, I'll just start off by saying this, that when I first thought, I was kind of interested in trying to understand crypto a little bit better, and thinking about it a little bit more last November, bought $100 worth of, and now some of these things, like language-wise, it's like, what, I don't even know what these things are. ETH, right? Yep. $100 worth of ETH, not Ethereum, but ETH. Is that correct?
That would be correct.
Okay. So I did that. I now have about $60 worth of Ethereum. So nobody should listen to anything if it sounds like I happen to say something smart.
It's better that way than the other way. Trust me.
Oh, really?
For long-term gain.
Oh, okay. All right.
You don't want to get cocky.
Yeah. So anyways, what was your path to kind of getting into crypto? And Sure. We'll get in towards the end, we'll kind of talk a lot about Tellor, but just how did you get there kind of a thing?
Man. So yeah, I found out Bitcoin was probably really early. So I was part of the Ron Paul 2012 campaign way back in the day. So it was, early on, Bitcoin was very libertarian. So, it was established we're going to overthrow the Federal Reserve and create a new monetary policy. So I had gotten in with the Ron Paul 2012 campaign, and some people there were big into Bitcoin and wanted to get it to be part of the campaign. So I had got some Bitcoin early. And yeah, that was kind of my journey into it. So I just kind of started playing around with it. Back then it was just, little online exchanges that you would trade on. And so I was trading around with that. And then,
so what year was that again?
This was 2011.
2011. Okay.
So yeah,
it's been a while.
It was a while. And then I got out in 2013 and then got back in 2014. I sold all of my Bitcoin for an engagement ring for my wife. And
it's better than a pizza.
Yeah, it was better than a pizza, but, sold that, and then I got back in, started doing some algorithmic trading. So
okay,
it was actually how I got into programming.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I'm actually an economist by training.
Okay.
So I was working at the Bureau of Labor Statistics down in DC. So I would do the employment numbers. So
right.
the first Friday of every month. doing some economic work there. And then I started writing code to trade cryptocurrencies on the side.
All right. What languages did you start with? JavaScript or something?
This was
else?
Python. So I was doing some SaaS work, if you know that one, in the government, and then started doing Python on the side just to write, because that was what all the APIs were. There was a lot of like documentation and tutorials you could do for arbing exchanges. Yeah. And so I got into that. And it was funny how that sort of just my interest in trading and finance, which had been there a little bit, that actually in 2015, it got me a job at the CFTC. So CFTC is the financial regulator, Commodities Futures Trading Commission.
All right.
So it regulates derivatives products, futures, options, commodities, and then now cryptocurrencies.
Right.
So I was just a researcher there, which was a blast. But that got me in 2015. They started the blockchain working group there. So, so it was.
Did you say 2015?
2015. Okay. This blockchain was a big buzzword back then. You know, it was all about everything's going to be on a blockchain.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, it was a little bit different. But so I got on the blockchain working group there, and that's whenever I started seeing people trying to do more than just currency with it. Okay. So people were trying to build financial products. This was also around the time Ethereum came about, and I started coding on Ethereum.
Okay. And was that just because it was something different, or did you see something at the time you're like, okay, I think there's something here I want to pursue, or what was the reason?
Well, you started just playing around with it. So everyone wanted like the vision for Bitcoin, like people had always said like, oh, you'll eventually be able to do whole financial contracts on top of Bitcoin, and it just wasn't ready. Like it was taking forever. And then this thing named Ethereum came along, and it was the first smart contract platform. And, it was super cool. You know, we had people come in and present to us about what they were building, and I was like, this is pretty awesome. And you know, the regulators, most of them like had no idea what they were looking at. Sure. But then
But you had some idea at that point.
Yeah. Well, and then I was sort of more on the philosophical side of it. You know, like this is like, what is this technology actually going to be used for?
Yeah.
And that was,
we're going to talk a lot about that too.
Yeah. So it sort of set me off on a different path than a lot of the other people, because, you know, part of the job at the blockchain working group was companies would come in and show us what they're building, and, you know, how it's going to be, you know, revolutionize finance. And, you know, JP Morgan would come in and all of the big banks, and they were going to put stocks and derivatives on a blockchain and as like the settlement layer for financial products. And this was
so that was was that roughly
2016? Yeah, 2017.
So that's great. Like, I'm glad that I didn't know you had that background, but like some of the stuff we're going to talk about, because there's been a lot of things that have come and gone.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
So that's part of this conversation, is understanding some of that as well. So
and then you know, everyone was talking about doing these, you know, derivatives that were still run by a bank but settled on a blockchain. And I was like, wait, like that's actually wrong. You know, the way I saw it was like, you can use these smart contracts to make a company that doesn't need a company. Like it can just be a contract. Like you don't need the middleman. The whole idea was to get rid of it. And so I left in 2017 to go start a derivative startup. I was going to write financial derivative code on top of Ethereum. And right at the beginning of 2018, I got an Ethereum Foundation grant. So the people who founded Ethereum gave me a little grant, and I brought on my co-founder Brenda. So that was whenever I started a team, and we were going to build up the derivatives platform. So it was she worked with me at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, actually, and then and she was kind of following throughout the whole time. And then and from there, so like a derivatives contract, you can imagine, is like let's say we're going to do a sample contract where we're betting on the price of Bitcoin, for instance. So like we'll lock Ether into a smart contract, and it has an initial price of Bitcoin. Say it's $40,000. In 2 weeks, if the price goes up, you get all the money in the contract, and if the price goes down, I get all the money in the contract. It's a simple contract that you can write, and the problem is who gets to say what the price of Bitcoin is at the end of that contract? Right. Whoever gets to say that basically gets to decide who wins the money. And that's, in the blockchain world, that's called the oracle problem.
Right.
Who gets to say what the price is? And
just so people understand, well, let me ask, because I'm not even sure I
Sure.
understand. So I assume part of the problem there is, and we'll talk more about like who gets to say, but I assume there can be very minor fluctuations, and they can happen very quickly. And so deciding who's on what side of that bet isn't always super obvious, depending on how you look at it, right?
Yeah, I mean that's a different problem.
Okay.
Per se. I mean the bigger problem for like smart contracts is they're not really smart.
Okay.
Like, they're very limited. So like it's like you can't read APIs. So like you can't access anything external. And the reason for that is part of the way that a blockchain works is everyone has to be able to validate everything. So if I run the code, you should be able to look at the code and run it a year later and see exactly what's going to happen. If it's calling an API, that API is going to change value. So that doesn't work. It's off the table. So you basically just have to have somebody input it at a certain time.
Right.
And we realized that this was a problem. There were actually no really good solutions at the time. Some people, the main way that people were doing it at the time was there was this like one guy that ran like a server in his house in London, and like he would like ping you back API results into your smart contract.
Really?
And that was
wow.
And that was like how the whole space was functioning then.
Yeah.
And we're
so on the other side of that, like how was he getting that information?
Well, he would just have a script. It was like a JavaScript script that would go out and fetch the API and then write it to your smart contract. And I think he was charging like it was 50 cents in Ether for every time he called an API and put it in your smart contract.
Okay.
And that was like how the whole space was running until like 2018.
Oh my gosh.
And,
wow.
Yeah, and so we thought we could do better than that. So we decided
the bar's here. We could get above that bar.
Yeah, so we became Tellor, and Tellor was focused on solving that oracle problem.
Which, as I've tried to do a little bit of research and understand some of this world, it's actually a complex problem to try to solve. To really solve the way I think you want to solve it, right? And so it's pretty interesting. Like it sounds maybe as you just described it, and some people will hear it, they'll go, well, if they're a little more technical, they'll go, well, that's not that big a problem to solve. It's an API. You can, but we'll talk about that because it is actually a little more difficult than that, right?
Yeah, well, it's sort of the problem you see with all blockchains. So the idea of what a blockchain is it comes to consensus on something. Mm-hmm. So, you want to say like, well, how do you know if John sends me Bitcoin?
Right.
Like we all should be able to come to consensus on it without having to rely on some central middleman. And in the same way, like whenever we call an API, how can we all come to consensus on what the answer is without relying on some authority? And that's the whole purpose of it. You want to make some way that it's permissionless, so anybody can do it. There's not somebody with a whitelist or a regulator standing over top of it, and it should work. So
right, and everything you just said, there's a lot packed in there.
Sure.
And I'm excited about it because there's some things in there that are really important that I didn't understand until I tried to start catching up a little bit to talk to you. And so I know you'll be able to shed even more light on it, but that, several times you said things about, the single person who gets to tell, give this information and that central point and why that's very important. Yeah. Why it's very important to not do that. So, those things are not obvious to someone, I think, on the outside looking in, but that is the foundation of everything. And so we'll get into that for sure. So I think what we'll try to do is attempt to define some terms, just the real basic terms of like cryptocurrency, blockchain. Those are probably a little more real as far as trying to define them. And then we can talk about NFTs and Web3, which are a little more not real, but we can talk about them. We can try to define them.
Vague concepts.
But these are things that people hear all the time.
Yeah.
A lot. And don't really know what the heck they are, or maybe they know, but they're not sure they know, or they think they understand something about it, and then something comes out in the news and you go, wait, that doesn't line up with what I thought.
Right, like why am I putting an NFT in the metaverse? I don't...
Yeah. Or one of the ones that I used to think, and then recently I was like, wait a second, this isn't what I thought it was that Bitcoin or a lot of cryptocurrency is anonymous, which it's not anonymous, right?
No.
But but it sounded like it was for quite a while. So anyways, there's a lot of things. Just we'll get some terminology down, and then we'll start talking about some of the things of like the culture and how the culture looks at that and the philosophy behind it and those kinds of things. The first thing I think I want to emphasize, and you can add in a few things here if there's anything that comes to mind, is just, and this will sound silly to you, but it won't to some people. Cryptocurrency is here to stay. So that might sound silly to you. Like you'll be like,
sure.
Yeah, obvious. And blockchain is here to stay. Like these things are part of like huge parts of our economy at this point, the way business happens. And I didn't understand it until I started looking into things. Well, maybe I shouldn't say huge parts, but they're foundational and growing.
There's actual use cases now for them.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go through a couple, and then maybe if anything comes to mind that you want to mention, that would be great too. But we just talked, before we got started, with everything going on with Russia and Ukraine, and I just read that Ukraine got something like $47 million worth of, Bitcoin and I think Ether as well, for people donating to them to try to support them, right? So that's pretty real, and that's happening right now. Companies like Walmart, Ford, Anheuser-Busch, they are all working with some form of blockchain to, I guess for them, the use case is kind of like a supply chain tracing kind of a capability. Sure. Drug manufacturers are looking at, or maybe even using it, but to show that their drugs haven't been tampered with, or that they haven't been counterfeited, those kinds of things. I did read a few of these, which were kind of funny. I wasn't aware of, but El Salvador actually has accepted Bitcoin as a legal tender.
They have. Their CEO is huge on crypto Twitter. Yeah. So not their CEO, their president.
Yeah. So. And then there's some things that have actually already come and gone with Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
So one of those that I saw was at one point in time, this is no longer the case, but at one point in time, like maybe it was a year or two ago, in Ohio, you could pay your taxes with Bitcoin. I don't think you can anymore.
I think in Arizona you still can.
Okay, all right. So I just thought that was interesting.
Every once in a while you'll get a rogue state congressman who throws in a bill.
Yeah. And then I saw some just your average companies that some of them did this for a time. Some of them are still doing it, but companies that accepted Bitcoin. So Burger King, AMC movie chain, Microsoft, AT&T. So again, the list could be a lot longer, but it was just to kind of let people know, like, this is very real.
Well, most of them can accept it now. Like now, most of the companies have gone beyond accepting it just because PayPal's actually integrated with it a lot. So like it's really easy. Just you can go from PayPal crypto to buying with dollars. Like you can treat it just like buying with anything else. I think
you want to do it, like if you're the one accepting that payment, you want to do it pretty quickly, right?
Well, most of the services will convert it to dollars for them. So, it's basically just like an instant sale when you buy to dollars.
Because you don't want to have $100 and all of a sudden you have $60.
Yes, exactly. Well, and then you also, there's sometimes like Bitcoin's actually pretty slow. So merchants don't like waiting for it.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So,
so that's just the general idea is that this is not a flash in the pan kind of thing. This is not something that you kind of heard a little bit about, and there was a small corner of the world that was interested in it, and probably in 20 years you'll never hear about it again. Like that's not what's happening here. And actually, to speak to that a little bit, we just talked on the way in. Do you want to just mention what you just got back from?
Oh yeah, ETHDenver. Yeah. So out in Denver there was an Ethereum conference, and I went back 4 years ago. Was the first time I went in 2018, and there were 500 people there, and it was like a little hackathon, and now I just got back from it, and there were 15,000 people over the city of Denver. It was just lines and lines out the door to get in, and every single person there was in the Ethereum space, like, or sort of tangential to it. So like the people were working in crypto, people were building on crypto, and it was an awesome event.
Yeah. And you actually spoke in a couple panels?
Yeah, those were good too.
What were they about?
So we're building on Algorand. So in addition to Ethereum, there's another chain called Algorand.
Okay.
So we're launching Tellor on that chain. And so we were just talking with them about Algorand, and that was on chain interoperability. So that's over time. Yeah. So if you have like Algorand and Ethereum, and there's, even Bitcoins, these are different blockchains. Similar to how like you can't talk to an API, they actually can't talk to each other.
Right.
So there's no way to like put a Bitcoin on the Ethereum chain or anything like that, and you actually need oracles to talk back and forth, and that's a big part of our job, is connecting things.
Cool.
So, and then the other one was just on kind of Web3 infrastructure.
Really?
What it was called? Yeah.
Oh, that was the one guy's doing like a YouTube thing, right?
Yeah. So he does decentralized data storage.
Okay.
So like you can actually upload a video and have somebody store it, and basically it can't get taken down, which is really cool.
That is. I need to look into that guy's stuff a little bit more, just because when he was talking, I was like, I don't understand.
How do you do this?
Yeah. I don't understand. But it's super interesting. So, okay. So, so we just talked about a lot of different things there. Let's talk about cryptocurrency, just real basic stuff here. So, like, what is cryptocurrency?
Digital money, I guess you could say, like tokens, something like that. It was like really easy back in the day, like in 2011, the early days of Bitcoin, like you would just pitch it to people like, it's just like a credit card, digital money, but it's anonymous and super cheap. And that was how you pitched it back in 2013 to everyone. And that it didn't play that way.
Well, I heard an interview a few days ago. Somebody was interviewing a guy that wrote a book about all the kind of heavy hitters that came out of PayPal, and historically how it kind of grew. And they said originally, when it was kind of coming to its own, the philosophy behind that and the owners behind that were very much trying to, it sounded a lot like cryptocurrency. It was like this borderless, frictionless way to move money around, which it still is in some ways, right? Yeah,
I mean, I think Elon Musk has even said like he would have loved to create Bitcoin, but the technology to create Bitcoin wasn't there until 2009. So he was just a little bit early on it, but that's originally what they were trying to create.
So people can get their hands around PayPal pretty well.
Yep.
So maybe it'd be helpful to say, okay, it's like PayPal, but here's how it's different than PayPal. So I don't know, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it goes down to like, well, what's like a blockchain? The way I like to explain it is you can think of blockchain similar to like an Excel spreadsheet. So like the Bitcoin blockchain is like an Excel spreadsheet, and on it it'll say John has 10 Bitcoin, Nick has 20 Bitcoin. But instead of like on a normal Excel spreadsheet, who gets to update it? Usually it would just be on somebody's computer, or we both have rights to update it. But the problem with that is, it's balances of money.
Yeah.
There's problems if you can change it. So Bitcoin is a distributed Excel spreadsheet. So you'd have a copy, I'd have a copy, and everyone would have a copy, and we'd have
if I change something in one of my cells, then
nobody else would change their Excel spreadsheets, and it wouldn't matter. So we all sort of have to agree on it. You come up with a way that we're all going to agree on any changes made.
All right. All right. So you even mentioned like years ago it was a little simpler because there was Bitcoin and maybe a couple others, but it was everybody
forks of people copied the Bitcoin code and launched their own and changed a variable.
So I went and looked. I knew there were a lot of currencies, but I went to coinmarketcap.com, and so this is the list of I guess all the currencies, and so at the very top it actually says 18,000 cryptocurrencies.
It's absurd.
And of course Bitcoin is at the top, and then you got Ethereum, and it kind of goes down from there. But I was surprised when I looked, because that's what I wanted to get, was like, what's the count? How many are there out there? I would not have guessed that there were 18,000 of them. Does that surprise you? Were you aware like there's just so many?
I knew it was absurd.
A huge number.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it's super easy. Like there's websites you can go on and you can create yours. Like,
really?
Really, really
easily.
I
didn't know that. I mean, I knew it had to be pretty easy because I hear these stories of people on a whim kind of creating something, but I didn't think it was that easy.
Yeah, so. I mean, like if we wanted to, we could probably do it in 20 minutes.
Right.
And I can email the person that runs this website and get you up there. So it's like,
oh wow,
yeah. So it's not.
You just got to find a name that isn't used, and then.
Yeah, that's probably the hard. Probably all the symbols are reused.
Or something.
Yeah. No, it's really really easy. It's just you look at how much value is stored in them,
right?
And that's where it's sort of a power law. Like Bitcoin's got 40% of the total value in all of the 18,000.
Yeah.
So
and so so the guy who created Bitcoin, well, the name behind Bitcoin is Satoshi Nakamoto. Right? But we don't really know if that represents a single person, if it's male, female, if it's a group of people, right? Is that right?
Yeah, so they launched Bitcoin anonymously.
And how did they do it?
There were just sort of a lot of early emails back and forth between some of the people.
Okay.
There were early like cypherpunk forums that people would sit on. And that's where they started passing around like the original white paper, and it was just kind of on message boards. And then some people, a few early programmers built like the initial implementation, and they just launched it.
Yeah.
It was very kind of underground, because what they were trying to do was overthrow the U.S. dollar. They thought that this was going to be banned by the U.S. government because it's digital money.
See, I didn't know, you just mentioned about cypherpunk, that was intertwined with Bitcoin from the beginning.
Yeah.
Because I knew there was this thread of like cypherpunk culture that you look at Web3 and you look at cypherpunk and you can see these parallels and you can see the embracing of it, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that actually Bitcoin like kind of.
Yeah, so probably the person who is most likely to be Satoshi is probably like Hal Finney.
Okay.
He was an early cypherpunk.
Okay. Right.
He's definitely one person, but even if you look at like some of the other people involved really early on, there was like Adam Back, Gavin Andreessen, a lot of the early cypherpunk movement.
Right. And so we'll touch on this, but so then when you get back to that, you're getting back to philosophy, a way of life, a way of thinking about how do I want to live this life? How do I want other people to live it? Like, it's not just about currency, so to speak, but it's much bigger than that. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it was about like internet freedom before that. And I'm sure you probably remember it maybe more than I do. Mm-hmm. But it was like the early idea that like people would run their own servers for a website or something like that, and like you wouldn't have these giant behemoth corporations who were running your email servers, and you should be able to do it privately. Those were some of the early things that were in Bitcoin.
Yeah. So we talk about Satoshi Nakamoto, and then with Ethereum, two founders of Ethereum.
Probably more, I think, right?
Okay. I don't know. The two guys I see all the time are the Vitalik Buterins. Is that how you say his name? And Gavin Wood.
Yeah, he was one of them.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe there's others. Those are the two that I saw listed.
Yeah. So. Well, it's one of those things like everyone says they're like a founder of Ethereum. I don't know. There's a lot of them. There's like Joseph Lubin's usually one that people throw out there. Or like,
who are they? Like, I mean, I saw a video, a pretty long interview with Vitalik, and I mean, it was obvious.
Yeah, he
just
was
talking to him. He makes the decisions, or he makes a lot of decisions.
Not anymore.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, now he's more or less just like a figurehead at this point.
But he had some definite thoughts on here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it because X, Y, and Z. Like, it seemed like he still had a lot of power there.
He has been wrong in the past.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
In the community. I mean, it's actually super interesting with cryptocurrency because, like whether if you look at like the early people who made Bitcoin, most of them don't work even on Bitcoin or related to Bitcoin because they had disagreements with how Bitcoin should go, and the community told them to go away
because they're passionate about
their vision for it or something like that. Yes. And I mean, Vitalik still sort of held on, and a lot of people, and he's not like, if you've seen pictures of Vitalik, he's not really like a strong CEO type that's trying to drive towards one. He's much more of like the philosopher who sits back and tries to just give general advice, and I think that's worked really well.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting hearing him talk because he seemed very much about making technical decisions not based on like short-term success.
Right.
Like it could be costly, some of those decisions in the short run, right?
For sure.
So, and probably has been, I guess. So.
Yeah. No, it's super different. How most of the time. There's a difference once you get to a certain size with these cryptocurrencies as far as who's actually in control of them because, most of the times no one is.
Yeah. Okay. So those are kind of there's a lot of other coins out there and we aren't going to go into all of those. These are the two that probably people are going to hear about the most.
And Tellor.
Yeah. And then there's Tellor.
Yes.
Well, so there's also these types of coins, and this is something, I know of, but I don't completely understand. Maybe you can shed a little bit of light on. So there's altcoins, which I guess is just anything but Bitcoin. I don't know. Do you know what an altcoin is?
That's like anything but Bitcoin. Okay. Usually is what that terminology came about whenever it was. So like if you look at like the Bitcoin dominance is what it's called. Like what percentage of the market cap is Bitcoin? Like pre 2015 and 2016, it was like. It would have 90%. Okay. And it was like everything else was an altcoin because it was basically worthless.
Okay. All right. Stable coins?
Stable coins are coins that want to be worth $1.
Okay.
Or some stable value. Some of them are like, you would be a stable euro, for instance.
And that, as I've heard about it, part of it is kind of obvious. It's stable, right?
Yeah.
Is it also... the idea that it's fungible, like it's you can quickly move back and forth between it and a dollar, or not necessarily?
Some of them not necessarily. So there's backed stable coins. So like some, if you've heard of like USDC or Tether, these are currencies where somebody will take a US dollar and they'll go put it in Tether's bank account, and then they will mint you a coin that's worth $1.
Okay.
And then you can trade it around, and then you can redeem it for US dollars.
Okay.
But then there's what are called algorithmic stable coins. And these are, so if you've heard like DAI, RAI.
Is Terra or Luna?
Yep. So they have one as well, TUSD.
Okay.
These ones are, so you could, for instance, like if you look at like a derivative contract, you could back, let's say we'll put, a bunch of Ethereum into a smart contract, and then we'll mint you a coin worth $1, but it's backed by Ethereum. So it's not actually backed by $1. It's just backed by this Ethereum in a smart contract. So those are the more decentralized ones, if you will.
All right. Do you think that Satoshi, it's hard to know what Satoshi was thinking, but if you look at, I guess he did write a lot about what Bitcoin was supposed to do, right? Do you think there would have been a need for stable coins if Bitcoin kind of worked the way it seemed like he wanted it to work?
I don't think so. I mean, the whole idea of, like if you look at like in economics in general, when a currency actually has usage, it'll be more stable. So if people are using Bitcoin to buy and sell things, paying people wages in it, if things are denominated in Bitcoin, there's actually a need for it, and it'll be more stable.
Yeah.
Right now, the reason cryptocurrencies are so volatile is that the vast majority of their value just comes from pure speculation.
Yeah, let me just mention real quick that what we're talking about now is that Bitcoin, I think, from what I've understood, is considered an investment more than it is like a currency at this point.
For sure.
Right. And so that's what we're talking about. And Satoshi, when he created the Bitcoin, it was created, the idea behind it was that it would be a currency.
Yeah, I mean, the title of the paper was like a peer-to-peer digital currency.
Right, meaning you would spend it every day, just like people use PayPal every day. And that's, right now, it's not the case with Bitcoin.
Exactly. So, I think since we're actually not seeing those use cases pop up, then you get more volatility in some of these things. So as we sort of mature as an industry, I expect the need for stable coins to go down. But they're here.
All right, let's talk about, let me bring something else up here. I'm sure you'll know what this is when you see it.
It's a miner.
A miner. All right.
Yep.
So people are going to hear about mining and miners. when I first saw one of these, I thought, man, that is really cool. I want to get one of these and I want to plug it in. So have you ever done that?
I haven't. So I've mined Ethereum.
Okay.
So like Ethereum in the past, you could just use like a normal computer.
Yep.
And
just put a laptop and put
like something with a GPU and you can make a little bit of money. Now it's more competitive, so you can't really do that. But I've never done Bitcoin mining. You should. There's actually, so I run the Frederick cryptocurrency meetup group, and one guy, he now works for Tellor, but like we met him.
I'll have to have you send that to me. We'll put it in the show notes. So,
he used to run a bunch of Bitcoin miners out of his house, and would have these things plugged in. So I've seen a bunch of them.
Yeah, I mean, from what I looked into it. I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. But I think I missed it. I missed the window because now they're all right. So let's do this now. If you want to be competitive,
right,
you want to do something like this, which is a mining farm, right?
Yes.
And I saw, like, I went and looked up videos and news about these things, and this is this was the moment when I saw this. I was like, holy crap, this is way more real than I ever thought it was. Because before I saw this, I thought, oh, you see these miners, I can have a miner, I can plug in, everyone can have their miners, and that's cool, it's interesting. But when I saw this, and then I saw articles about these mining farms being placed strategically where cheap power is, and you see people walk through these things. I mean, it's a major industry, right?
For sure.
And I guess previous to, maybe it was like a year ago, like a lot of the mining was happening in China. And then China shut that down and created this like major crisis in mining, and a lot of
Maryland got a lot.
Yeah, now mining's moving here, right? So, yeah, to me, this was one of the things when I saw all this. It was just let me know the scale at which this is occurring, and obviously, right? There's tons of money being put into this infrastructure to mine these things, and that's not a fly-by-night thing. People are putting years and years of forecasting into these things.
You can still buy one, and you can make a little bit of money,
right?
You know,
I saw that you could buy one, but you can also, like, if I were going to do it now, I think I'd go into one of these cloud-based kind of farms where you can purchase.
Yeah, but you're kind of just speculating on the price of Bitcoin. Okay. So, like, you know, there's the Bitcoin hash rate, so how difficult it is to mine sort of varies.
Right. Talk about that a little bit, about the hash rate and the difficulty.
Yeah. So the difficulty, you know, what they're doing is they're just guessing a number. So that's all.
Yeah. It's crazy to think about that. Like when you read about, wait, what? That's what they're doing?
Yeah. Basically, you know, you're guessing a number. So that way, like the modulo of some other thing has set like a certain number of zeros at the end.
Right.
So all these things are doing is guessing random numbers, and you know you could do this on your CPU. But so the question is, how fast can you have a computer that guesses numbers? And basically, it's just come down to, well, how much does it cost in electricity to do it? So if you know, that's why you'll always see like kids in college do it, and you know you'll make $1 a day or something like that. Right. But why wouldn't they? It's free electricity.
Right. Yeah, in 10 days I can buy a pizza.
Yeah. So, you know, but if you can find a really cheap source of electricity, that's where you sort of get it. Okay.
But there is some predictability to that. Yeah. The amount of time it takes, right? Like I think.
So the Bitcoin, at least with Bitcoin, so it adjusts every 2 weeks, the difficulty. Okay. So, you know, it's sort of, if there's, it targets a 10-minute block time. Right. So if people are solving it too fast, the difficulty will go up. If they're solving it too slow, it'll go down.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah. And then, so it sort of moves, but you know, if it only adjusts that fast, the price can move wildly in those times. Right. So if the price dips by 50% and the difficulty is still really high, now it's all of a sudden unprofitable to mine. Right. So you're not really making any money, and a lot of miners will just shut off and go offline, and the block time will go up. Okay.
So there's this mining that happens. It happens at scale like this. It still happens with individuals with their one, maybe a few little miners. It can happen, you know, online in these kind of global cloud environments. But there is a maximum number of Bitcoin that will ever be created, right? No? Yes?
I mean, maybe.
Because what I had read was like that it would max out, and it would be like 21 million bitcoins was like the maximum number. You think, does that sound?
Yeah, so it is 21 million. That's what it's supposed to be.
And then because the rate at which they're mined is roughly like every 10 minutes, that somewhere in the time range of 2140, the last Bitcoin will be mined. Which is just interesting to think about. So,
yeah. It's cool, but it's a long time away.
It is. But it's interesting. I don't just that concept to me probably means, if I could understand it a little bit better, there's got to be some dynamics there as you get closer to that number, and how many people are mining and the value of that mining, and if people are going to keep pouring money into.
Well, the bigger problem is, so like what mining is mining's actually security.
Okay.
So, whenever we were talking about who gets to update the Excel spreadsheet, whoever solves that mining problem is the person that's deemed worthy to update the Excel spreadsheet.
Okay.
And you validate all past transactions with it, and then you go on. And so you would assume that whichever chain has the most people solving it with the highest difficulty, that's the chain that most money is on, and therefore it's the most secure, and that's what's right.
Okay.
But the problem is so it's minting new. So basically it's using inflation right now, because every 10 minutes some new Bitcoin is created, and that's what's paying for security. So there's two ways that security is done on Bitcoin. So you have that inflationary reward, and then you also have fees. So if you send me some Bitcoin, it's going to cost you something.
Okay.
Sometimes $10, say, in fees. At peak times, it can be upwards of $100 to even send me a Bitcoin.
Okay.
As the block reward goes away, so the amount that they're printing, you need the fees to pick up.
Mm-hmm.
And if the fees don't pick up enough to cover it, then security goes down on Bitcoin, and that's actually a serious problem that people are worried about in the future.
Oh, really? Okay. All right.
So
interesting. So we touched on this a couple minutes ago. Maybe we kind of answered it, but again, trying to get a general understanding of cryptocurrency. So right now, sounds like we're saying Bitcoin is an investment. It's not really a currency. It doesn't mean you can't spend it, but typically what people are doing with it, they're not buying it to spend it. They're buying it to keep it, hoping that it increases in value, right?
Yeah.
Is that typical for a lot of cryptocurrencies at this point, or is it just a mix? Or what are your thoughts on that?
It's typical for most of them. I mean, most of the value comes from speculation, you can call it.
Yeah.
I mean, Bitcoin, since it's sort of proven to be a bad currency, mainly because it's expensive. If we're saying it costs $10 for me to send you something, you're probably not going to use it. So it's actually picked up the current tagline is digital gold. Mm-hmm. People talk about it as like there's a scarce amount of it in supply, and you should buy it like you would a gold.
Right.
And that's kind of what they're going after for that. Okay. But yeah, there are other use cases besides currency, and we can talk about that too.
Yeah. So the first use case of Bitcoin that I understand, or this is the famous like Bitcoin first purchase with Bitcoin was 2 pizzas. Is from what I gather. I don't know if that was actually the first one, but that was the first. That's the story, right? That I don't have the year. I didn't write the year down, but it was whenever it was early on with Bitcoin. This guy bought. I think he tweeted this. He said, anybody can bring me 2 pizzas, and this is going to sound crazy to people who don't know the story.
Right.
Of course, anybody in your community is going to know the story, but he said 2 pizzas, and I will give you 10,000 Bitcoins. And that's, I guess,
they were worthless at the time.
I know, but it's funny to hear that story, right? And so at the time, that was about $40. Now, you say now, like I don't know now. When I looked it up, it was like $470 million.
Yeah, it's absurd
for 2 pieces. So it's pretty wild.
Yeah,
I mean that was years ago, but it's still just interesting to think about that, So.
Yeah.
All right, so I don't know. Do you think I'm going to ask you in a second here, like for what are the current challenges for crypto, like in the immediate future. But maybe before we go there, and we can go right there, but are there any other things that we haven't talked about that you think would be helpful to say if somebody's just trying to get their hands around this thing called cryptocurrency?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just like, what is cryptocurrency good at?
Oh, okay. Yep.
You know, like, and the big thing is it's censorship resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody can shut it down. That's the big use case that we found so far in crypto. Like, past the pizza thing, the next actual use case for crypto, if you remember, was the Silk Road.
Mm-hmm.
So this was, people were using it to buy drugs on the internet. Because you could use a digital money and then somebody would mail you drugs.
Yeah.
And that was super cool. After that, like say the 2015, 2016 period, it was actually Chinese people used it for capital controls in a lot of ways. So, you know, sometimes in a lot of countries, it's illegal to send lots of money out overseas. Mm-hmm. So people would buy Bitcoin and then they would send that overseas. These were getting around regulations.
Right.
And that's really still where cryptocurrencies shine.
Right.
You know, I think...
Which, depending on the storyline,
sure,
we go, yes.
Exactly.
Or we go, that's terrible. How can they do that, right? If it's going to a drug dealer, we're like, cryptocurrency is enabling terrible things to happen. But if it's going to a woman in Ukraine who's trying to feed her children, or to the mayor of this town who's trying to get his people armored vests, we're like, yes, cryptocurrency is doing its job.
It's a good thing, right?
So
yeah, well, and then you can think of even other regulations that it got around. So like in 2017, some people may have heard of ICOs. So these were whenever people were this was right whenever people started creating their own currencies and then selling them as basically like startup investments.
Okay.
So, you know, you would come and I could make, you know, you could make John Thor a coin, and you could go sell it and raise money that way.
Right.
And the reasons these were so powerful was, if you know, like raising money through the SEC and through the right ways is kind of difficult.
Right.
And it's also super difficult to invest in early stage companies unless you're kind of a pro. Cryptocurrencies just completely blew that away. Mm-hmm. Like you could invest in just an idea as a retail investor, and that was super powerful.
Yeah, and again, that wasn't like an accidental part of crypto, right? Like that was the point.
Right, like we're getting around these regulations, these middlemen that are going to take a fee. The fact that we're going to have to go to a lawyer and go to the SEC.
And when you hear people talk about crypto a lot, or the thing I've heard with what we're just saying is it lowers or removes the friction, right? Yep. And that's the term that I've heard a lot, and that's what they mean by that, right? Some of it, the regulation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then more recently, we've just kind of built on top of that. So, you know, people may have heard of DeFi, so decentralized finance. Like now we actually have completely decentralized exchanges. So the regulators have done a decent job. They've kind of cracked down on cryptocurrencies exchanges. You know, you used to just be able to go there with a credit card and go buy as much cryptocurrencies as you want. Now, if you go try and do it, you got to upload pictures of your driver's license.
Right.
You got to go pay taxes on it. It's not much fun.
Right.
But so how do you get around that? Well, we're going to make decentralized exchanges that nobody can shut down.
Right.
And we've done that. And those are really the use cases. You know, like I always say, like the best use cases are going to be like, what's some regulation or some restrictive government that we're getting around something, and let's go there.
Okay. What do you think the current challenges are looking forward a little bit with crypto? So like one of the things that I came to understand, which kind of surprised me, but I mean, after I understood the technology a little bit, it made more sense, but that Bitcoin at the time that I had read some of these things, it could do about 7 transactions per second, which seems unbelievably slow.
Super slow.
And so that to me is pretty obviously a problem. But are there other things, or what would you say would be the challenges for crypto right now?
Yeah, I mean, cryptocurrency as a whole, like Bitcoin didn't scale, but you can think cryptocurrency sort of did.
Mm-hmm.
And it did by just making 18,000 of them.
Right. Because there are others that are much faster.
Yeah, right? Other cryptocurrencies can be much, much faster. And usually that's like, I'd bring it up if I had it. It's called the scalability trilemma. So there's like a trade-off between like how secure and decentralized you are versus how fast you are.
Okay.
So, similar to with the Excel spreadsheet, if we all have to come to consensus, if we take longer to look over it, it's going to be more secure. So,
yeah. Okay. So there is, with that speed,
there's usually a trade-off in terms of security or decentralization.
Okay.
Sometimes they'll like say like, instead of having an open mining network, we'll just have these 12 guys are the miners, and it's faster.
Right.
And that's definitely one challenge. The biggest challenges in my mind, so you have kind of the on-off ramps are still a trouble. And
that's part of what your company is dealing with, right? Or is that a different problem?
We're on off ramps for data, more just customers. Like if you want to buy it with a credit card, it's easy, but that goes into the next problem, which is privacy.
Well, let me just say, the on-ramp is not that easy.
Sure.
Because, I mean, I'm somewhat technical, right? I'm pretty technical. Compared to a lot of my friends, I'm very technical. Compared to you, maybe not so much with crypto, but it was a little bit complicated. I mean, if you just go to Coinbase, it's kind of simple. But as soon as you want to do something with that, and it doesn't just sit there, it gets kind of complicated.
It's super complicated still. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean that's still a problem. We want to make it so you hopefully don't have to know how to write code to use this stuff.
Well, here's one of the things that I've gotten recently from this I didn't understand and is really exciting to me. So I see some of these problems and I'm kind of like, what the heck? Like, why are all these people building these things on this thing that seems to have so many problems? But then, like, I think the thing that I started to understand was it's early days, but people have a vision and they're building on something sometimes that is to come. Sometimes it's here, parts of it are here, but it seems like they're building on something like, we know that this is going to happen. We know that this capability will be here. And when it does, I want to be there with my stuff in place and I'm ready to go. Like that seems like some of it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen it like, it's not here yet, but from somebody who's been in the space for like 5 years, like it's, we're light years beyond where we were, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, especially.
All right. We said a lot there. And we did delve into a little bit of some other things, blockchain a little bit, but mainly, hopefully we did a good job of giving some foundation for when somebody hears about Bitcoin or they hear cryptocurrency, they have a little bit of an idea what they're talking about there. So let's go to blockchain. And I wasn't sure. I mean, blockchain, I understand foundationally you can't have Bitcoin without blockchain. But I thought, well, people are going to be a little more familiar with Bitcoin. And so we talk about that first. But now let's go to
crypto. I come from that side of the world.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about blockchain. You touched on it earlier. And you said, which I think is a very helpful metaphor, the spreadsheet idea. Mm-hmm. The thing that, as you read about it, you hear a lot, but unless you're an accountant, isn't real helpful is the ledger, is the idea of this public ledger, right, that everybody can see and everybody has to agree on. The spreadsheet is more, I think it's a little better.
I like the word spreadsheet better than ledger.
A lot of people, everybody's seen a spreadsheet, or most people have. Most people understand that a little bit. So I thought
if you're listening to this
really
podcast,
good.
You probably know what Excel is.
Yeah. So that was really helpful. So I appreciate that. So if you were going to describe kind of the foundational elements of blockchain, meaning if you take this away from blockchain, you don't really have blockchain anymore. What would be, like, one of them I think is the decentralized nature of blockchain.
Yeah, it's sort of just distributed consensus.
Okay.
That's kind of the main piece. So
okay, so consensus is important.
Mm-hmm.
Decentralization is important. Does it matter? Does it need to be like anonymized, or is that not necessarily a big deal? Like you can have it or not have it for blockchains.
Yeah, you don't have to have it.
Okay, all right.
I mean, most blockchains like Bitcoin or Ethereum, like they're pseudonymous.
Right.
So like, you just have an ID that's a big long string, but
yeah. Okay.
Those could be names.
All right. So you mentioned consensus. Can you talk a little bit about, we talked about this earlier, but I don't think really just focus on it for a few minutes here. How is consensus built on the blockchain? How does that happen?
So there's like kind of a bunch of different ways that you can build consensus. You know, how do you sort of agree on something?
Yeah.
you can have consensus in some of these other systems just by voting.
Oh, really?
Like on Tellor, since we're actually built on top of a blockchain, like how do we get consensus on what's good? Well, like anyone with our token can vote on it.
Right.
Come to consensus.
Yeah. Okay.
Like with Bitcoin, it's obviously done through the mining process.
Okay.
So there's, mining is not as popular as it say once was, but you have a bunch of people compete to solve a problem, and whoever put the most resources into trying to do that, they get the opportunity to update the ledger. And then with that, they validate all past transactions. And then it goes to another challenge, if you will. And whoever solves that validates all past transactions. And so if the person who did the previous one was lying, you wouldn't be building on his chain. You would build on whoever solved the honest one.
Okay.
So, and then that's why you would always...
Because otherwise you're wasting your time. You're wasting
right,
your effort.
because you don't want to be on one of the ones that's going to get thrown out by everyone. So you try and only build on the right ones, or ones that sort of go according to the rules.
Okay. And so that's where, we'll talk about this in a few minutes, but that's where if you have a problem with consolidation, that's where the problem comes. Like if one entity can get the next one after that, right, and make a decision. But they can eventually do that.
Well, this comes into the idea of finality.
Yeah.
And so, like, how long is, like, final? Like,
right.
So, like, let's say I solve the next Bitcoin block, and I say, no, I'm just going to mint Nick 1 million Bitcoin right out of thin air. Well, if you solve the next one, then you're just going to ignore mine.
Right.
You're going to build on top of the previous one and be good to go. Like everyone's software would just probably reject mine. Right. But let's say I do it's called a 51% attack. Let's say I actually get 51% of all the miners, and I can just build block after block. It's very, very costly to do so, but it costs me, you would still be rejecting that in a lot of ways as a miner, because you would hope that eventually it would revert back to ignoring them. But as a user, you're just kind of waiting for the system to go back. So that's why, like, if you deposit money on Coinbase or Bitcoin on Coinbase, you have to wait 6 block confirmations, so a whole hour before it actually will show up on Coinbase.
Okay.
Because they wait, because the one way that you could do it would be called like a double spend. So I'll mine the block and say, like, I sent you Bitcoin on Coinbase, and then if I mine the next one, maybe I'll mine on top of one that says I didn't send you money on Coinbase, and now if I had already sold it on Coinbase and got US dollars, now I have the Bitcoin and the US dollars, and that's a problem. So does that make sense, or sort of?
Yeah, I mean sort of. I'll say sort of. Yeah.
I see.
Okay. So okay. I think we talked about consensus. I didn't. It makes sense when you say it, but it wasn't obvious to me that. Actually, I didn't understand it at all. So it is interesting. Like, mining is not necessarily the thing for consensus. You said like that was like the main way of gaining consensus, but not necessarily. It's not the only way, but it's not even maybe the preferred way at this point. Yeah.
Now most people use what's called proof of stake.
Okay. All right.
So this would be like you lock up.
Right.
Say some Ethereum, so it would be 30 Ether. You lock it up, and then now we're just all going to take turns. And if you lie, you're going to get your Ether slashed.
Okay. So proof of stake means I have a stake in this.
You have a stake in this.
Yeah.
And now you get to take part in the validation
and process. My stake in it is my ETH. Yeah. Okay.
And you can lose it.
And if I lie, I've thrown it away.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
So
that's okay. And you make that circle of consensus small. Is that right? Like smaller than what it would be if like.
What do you mean, like people who are allowed to do it?
No, the people who are part of that.
No, it can be as big as you want.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, that's part of. Sometimes you can make it smaller. So other chains will limit it to say like 21 people or a certain number of people, and you can be faster that way. Like it's actually like. Is
it less secure that way because it's a smaller group of people?
Less decentralized. It might.
Okay.
It's hard to say secure.
Right. It depends on how you think about it.
Yeah. Less decentralized, Because, I mean, you actually have a problem whenever it comes to the number of nodes and the number of validators you have in a system, just from pure, like, if you have a message, how fast, like, physically, like, sending messages can you go all the way around the world? And it's like you actually hit limitations, you know, so if you had like 1 million different validators all across the world, it's going to take a second, just like at the speed of light traveling to all of them. So you hit some issues there, and that's why people will limit it.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Interesting. So I think you talked about this a little bit. So the kind of the promise of blockchain is this publicly verified source of truth kind of thing. And you mentioned a word, and so I'll just go to it. You know, you talked about censorship, right? Yeah. And so, and when I talked to you a while back, just trying to figure out, would this work out doing this interview, you talked about that. And as I read about blockchain and thought about it some, I'll put it this way, and you tell me this might not be the right way to frame it, but there are a couple different uses of blockchain. It seems like one, you know, broad one would be what you're talking about, I think, which is to protect against censorship. I'm going to frame that as saying that's like a defensive mechanism, all right? But then there's also like this offensive mechanism of blockchain, I think, which I would say would be like promoting transparency, right? Sure. To like prove your righteous behavior to people. So I don't know, you just want to talk about like those two ways of thinking about it and why for you it seems like the most important thing is the idea of protecting against censorship.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's, you know, you can be transparent with a database in a lot of ways, you know, because it all comes down to like, what are you going to do if they actually are lying?
Right.
It might not be a good thing, you know, like sometimes like a Walmart or somebody will say like, oh, well, we're putting things on the blockchain. Well, like who's running their validators?
Right.
That says they can't go back and change things.
Right.
Maybe they are putting it on Ethereum blockchain, but most of the times they're just running a private blockchain.
It's a private blockchain, which there's public and private blockchains.
Public ones, and so
if it's private, then they're doing the validation themselves, perhaps, or who is doing it? Or is a good question.
And sometimes they'll say like, well, we'll have a group of people who are trusted, and and at that point, I always say like, really, these 4 companies couldn't agree on one of them to run a database in a trusted manner. You know,
I gotcha. Right.
Like, you guys can't trust one of you.
So at that point, you don't need the blockchain to do that.
Right. You wouldn't need a blockchain. Like, you could just use a central, like, you know, like if a bunch of companies were doing it here in Frederick, like, we'd probably trust the Frederick County government to run the database for us. Like, I don't think they're going to lie.
Right.
But, you know, like, what do you really need to put on a blockchain?
Okay.
And I think that's why, like, I you know, maybe the blockchain people watching this will hate me for it, but, you know, I'm not as sold on those blockchain use cases, because the blockchain, you know, if you think about it, like, if one person's updating a database, it's going to be way, way more efficient. You just have one person doing it and validating the whole thing. Whereas if all of us are doing it, it's slower, it's more expensive. So you should really think about, do you really need this to be censorship resistant and really, really need it to be transparent? Or because you're going to be paying for it. So
right. And so, okay, so talk a few minutes about why blockchain is such a good tool for resisting censorship.
Yeah, it's just proven that like anybody can sort of access it. So the idea that you can have these, whether it's a digital currency or, you know, even a digital community of people, you know, you're just sending information. Like the ledger is just information. It doesn't have to be a currency. And
so the nature, because it's, I mean, abstractly it's data, right? But it could be any kind of data. It can be any kind of data. The fact that it's public data, it just is, right? It's out there. And the fact that it's public data that's been verified as true by the community.
Well, it's not necessarily verified as true, but it's verified as there.
Okay.
Like, once it's written on once you write it on the Bitcoin blockchain, nobody's going to be able to take it down.
Right. It's verified as public information.
Yes.
You can decide if it's true or not, I suppose.
Right.
But it can't be censored, right? It can't be removed.
Exactly.
Or I guess if it would be removed, it would be catastrophic to the chain or something.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, you're a bad chain.
Right. Right. Okay. So in that sense, the nature of it is censorship proof, right?
Exactly. So it's this, the whole original idea was like a currency that, no one's going to be able to control. So they're not going to be able to take your money from you.
Right.
In the case of something bad, they're not going to be able to inflate your currency against your will.
Yeah.
The same thing sort of comes in whenever you talk about people are starting to put the videos or information on the blockchain. Now you can put it on there and nobody's ever going to be able to take it down. This is information that, WikiLeaks started using it really early on. Yeah. For instance, they would just put hashes of their information or sometimes even certain information on the blockchain.
Okay.
So that way the government couldn't take it down.
Okay. All right. Let's talk about challenges for blockchain.
Oh man, we're getting technical here.
Maybe this isn't a challenge. That'd be great if you just tell me, John, don't worry about that, man. It's not going to be a problem. But one of the things I'd read about, and it's funny when you read about these things, like, so if I read a book about blockchain that's like 2 years old, it's like completely outdated, right? So it's like hard to keep up with these things. But
you should try building software in this space. It's the worst.
I would not want to do it. I'm having a hard enough time keeping up in the areas that I'm in right now. So one of the things that I had read about was the size of the blockchain as a whole. And this was something that was confusing. So I don't know, maybe you can shed some light on this, but it was interesting as I looked into the blockchain for Ethereum just a short time ago, it appears like it was over a terabyte in size. Then all of a sudden it like dropped for some reason down to like half a terabyte in size. So I don't know, do you know anything about that? Like why that? I'm not sure what the reason is. Doesn't matter that much, but I'm just curious if you knew anything about that. If something changed in the way that they were storing.
Well, Ethereum's in the process of updating to ETH 2.0.
Okay.
So they're right now in the process of going from proof of work to proof of stake.
Okay. All right. So it might have had something to do with it.
Lots of things are changing.
So the question, either way, I think the same question applies, is whether it's a terabyte or half a terabyte, it's a lot of data, right?
It is a lot of data.
And so is that a weakness because there's only certain, and we are going to spend a lot of time in a few minutes here about centralization versus decentralization.
Sure.
So that's a big thing with this. And so the concern is if the idea behind the power behind this is that, anybody can take part in this, and by anybody taking part in it, it becomes this public, affirmation of the data. Well, I can't really put half a terabyte on just anything, right? And so then it starts to become this thing where, well, there's only certain people who can do that. And so then you, the average person, has to go, oh, well, I'll trust so-and-so to do that piece because I can't have the whole blockchain on my system.
Yep.
Is that an accurate concern, or is it different? Is there something that can alleviate that, or what are your thoughts on that?
So people are looking at different ways of alleviating it. So it's definitely an issue. And, Ethereum's actually not that bad, like some chains. So, like one way that you could think about it, for instance, like how cheap are transactions, it has to do with like how much can fit in each block.
Right.
So like one way to make transactions cheaper and would be to just increase that block size.
Right.
So you could make it really big.
Which wasn't that like a huge debate?
It was a huge debate in Bitcoin
point?
a long time ago. And one of the big downsides is that this chart goes up way, way faster. So.
Oh yeah, I didn't think about that.
Right.
Yeah,
so
makes sense.
Yeah. So that's a bad thing.
But it also it's kind of like inherent, right? Like
it is.
It goes up faster because you can do more transactions.
Right. But then, or if you make it or if you make it twice as fast.
Right.
This chart goes up twice as fast.
So is Vitalik or somebody thinking about this problem?
Yeah, no. So a lot of like what they're actually thinking about doing with Ethereum is making you actually pay rent on your smart contract. So not making things immutable forever.
Okay.
So like, because like one of the problems with Ethereum and with Bitcoin is like you can you store the entire chain all the way back until it started. So with Bitcoin back to 2010, and like at some point you could actually just say like, well,
right,
let's only save
Do
the
we really
past
need
year.
Yeah, right.
Like it's fine.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that they're looking at doing. You could also say like, you could put it on time based. So like, listen, I'm going to pay to store this on the blockchain for a month. I'm going to pay to put it on the blockchain for the year until it's finalized or something like that. And those are some things that different blockchains are doing.
Have they talked about how that decision would be made for like how far back you go?
Yeah, I mean, they've been debating it for
a
a long time.
Because it's a big deal, right?
Yeah.
How you make that decision.
No, and that's like some of them, like, so Solana, if you've heard of them.
Yes, I have.
They're really fast with big blocks, and they're really cheap. And they've just made the idea that they've gone the route of saying that it's fine if you have more centralized nodes that will become just data centers. So like if, eventually it's just going to be giant data centers running their nodes. But you get super fast, cheap transactions.
Listening, if you hear giant data center, maybe you're thinking Google, Facebook.
Exactly.
And then if we go back, which we're going to come around to again, this philosophy behind this of decentralization, that's not it, right?
No, we don't trust those guys.
Right. So that comes back to not just in theory, but very much like that problem, right? So
yeah, no, I mean they've sort of proven time and time again that they take things down that they want to.
Right.
And sometimes you'll agree with them and sometimes you don't.
Right. All right. So we've knocked around cryptocurrency. We've knocked around blockchain. I think, really well. So thank you for that. So now we're going to go into some more,
cool.
Maybe more difficult things. I don't know, a little less pressure maybe because they're just so, to me, they're kind of goofy, not goofy. They're interesting, hard to nail down, like trying to put, nail Jello to a wall, I think. That's what it seems like to me as I'm looking into NFTs.
Sure.
I mean, you can kind of define an NFT, but then making sense of NFTs and thinking through that. And we might not be able to make sense of them. That's okay.
Yeah,
that's okay.
Not my area of expertise, to
be
honest.
That's all right. That's okay. So the understanding I have is like as far as what an NFT is one definition I saw, which after reading I thought, well, I think this sounds pretty accurate.
It's about as good as you'll get, probably.
I think it said a unique digital identifier that cannot be copied, substituted, or subdivided, that is recorded in a blockchain and that is used to certify authenticity and ownership. That last part is a lot of times the case. It's used to certify authenticity and ownership, but I don't know if that's always the case. But anyways, I don't know. Does that sound roughly like something that makes sense with some of the stuff?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to like in the spreadsheet example. If you have like where Bitcoin is like numbers, so you can add yours to mine. That's like fungibility.
Okay.
Whereas an NFT is like a unique thing. So say like a string of your name.
Mm-hmm.
You can't add those together. There's not like, they're just not.
Okay.
Each one is sort of supposed to be unique. And then,
right. It's locked. Can't do anything with it.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to talk in a couple minutes about a couple famous NFT things that, a lot of people, well, maybe some people haven't heard of, but that are kind of fun and interesting. But are there any NFTs in particular that you're aware of right now that are interesting or noteworthy?
Well, I mean, so NFTs are actually interesting to me. So I was in 2018. So like whenever we were just getting started, and so like we sort of ran out of money for our startup multiple times, as startups do, right. And to sort of keep my team and pay our salaries, right. Like I would take on consulting projects to build other people's code, and one of them I built crypto pets.
Crypto Pets.
Crypto Pets.
Is it still around?
No.
I gotta look up Crypto Pets.
Yeah, so they had, it was an NFT project, so I built all the Solidity code, so the back end code for it.
Okay.
And I was like, this is awful. This was back.
It's paying the bills.
Yeah, but it was like in 2018, and they were paying me to build it, so I built these NFT tokens, and of course NFTs weren't quite a thing in 2018, so they didn't last. which was unfortunate.
Wow.
The founders
you were just ahead of your time.
I know. Well, the founders are still in the space. They're doing just fine.
They're still in the NFT space, you mean?
No, they're in the crypto space.
Oh,
so
okay.
they work on different projects now.
Yeah. I wonder, do you talk with them at all?
Yeah, no.
Did they say, man, if we had done this like 2 years later?
They did, yeah. They're like, we totally missed out.
That's crazy. That's pretty wild to think about.
Yeah, no, it was like these, they were like, it was like a 21 and 22-year-old kid who were didn't know how to code but wanted to do these crypto pets. They wanted it was supposed to be like Pokemon cards on the blockchain.
Interesting.
And anyway, it didn't go anywhere, but I got my first flare of building NFTs then.
Yeah. And at that point were you like, what the heck?
Yeah, no, it was, I didn't really get it at the time. But, at the same time, you're like, maybe something will come of this, because it was, it was okay. But, now it's just gotten completely ridiculous.
Yeah. So. I think maybe it's all blurring together, I think. But I think the interview that you did, or the panel that you were on in Denver, maybe this is where I heard this. I'm not sure. I think it was there. But I've heard of maybe a few places. But with NFTs, some people were saying that one of the predictions is that they're going to take off. There's going to be NFTs, and not only will there be NFTs in, many NFTs, but like every person will have their own NFTs, like NFT, right?
Yes.
Or maybe multiples, right? Like I'll have one for like work, like the company I work for, and I'll have one for maybe, I don't know, the town that I'm in, and for some group that maybe if I'm part of, a crypto group, that all sorts of different tokens for all kinds of reasons. And that there would be the guy, I think it was a guy in the panel. It's like there would be trillions of tokens in the world. So I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I sort of disagree a little bit. No, I mean, I just don't think most people have, maybe it'll be NFT-like in the background. Okay. But I mean, you could say like a driver's license is a...
Yes.
You could theoretically just store it on a blockchain as an NFT, a unique one.
Right. But why? So why not? Like, why do you look at that and you go, well...
Well, I think it would come down to it may be NFT-like, but the central government likes running that database, and I don't think they're going to put it on a public blockchain anytime soon.
Okay.
All right. So maybe it's a little bit of the technology, but I don't necessarily think it won't be like it, buying digital goods or something like that. And I think the other, so a lot of times, what are NFTs sort of used for? Mm-hmm. And, the main thing right now is you can have an NFT over a digital ownership of art.
Right.
But, who will that be sort of a big thing that people care about? Maybe.
Right now it is.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that for a second here. Let me see. So let me bring this up here.
There we go.
Yeah, right. The Bored Ape Yacht Club.
Well, Bored Ape is slightly different.
Oh, okay. All right. Help us understand this a little bit.
Well, this one you actually...
you know about these things.
Well, this one you actually get membership to a real yacht club.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there's a real yacht club somewhere in the world.
Okay.
That if you own one of these, you get access to. So the big problem with NFTs and kind of cryptocurrencies in general is they're these, what I like to call bearer assets.
Okay.
So if somebody steals your NFT, they own it now. There's no getting it back within cryptocurrency because nobody else controls the database.
Right.
With a driver's license or your identity, the reason I don't think that will be an NFT is that if somebody steals it, you want it back.
Yeah.
You should still get it back.
Yeah.
So at least NFTs in the current sense of on public blockchains without anybody being in control of them, you won't see that because certain things.
Okay.
You could have an NFT for entrance into this building. If one of your employees loses his computers and all of his NFTs, you're not going to give whoever finds the computer access to the building.
But that makes sense.
Sure.
But like you just said, I take some very important things like a wallet and credit cards, and I put them all in one thing, right? Like license and credit cards. I put them all in a wallet. If I lose that wallet, and that's right, it happens, right? People. So you could imagine, right, a device that's your NFT wallet.
Certain ones,
there are wallets, right?
These and that's what I think. Certain things will.
And if you lose that, you're screwed.
Yep.
So don't lose it.
Well, NFTs have like brought out the worst in hackers and everyone like that because you know, like usually it's a lot of people who are pretty noob when it comes to cryptocurrency. So you know, they'll just be like, "Hey, can you send me your NFT and I'll validate it for you?" And then they're like, "Sure," and it's gone.
Wow, really?
It happened to one of the Bored Ape people. They sent like a multi-million-dollar NFT because somebody asked him for it.
Oh my gosh!
And it was like, you know, like just really, really easy hacks. Like, so don't do that.
Yeah, I just thought this was super interesting, just from the perspective of the craziness of NFTs. So yeah, the Bored Ape. So okay, so you said there is an actual yacht club, like Bored Ape Yacht Club.
Yeah, that's one of the few that actually is tied to something real.
Okay, and then there's Bored Ape Art, right? And so do you have, if you buy one, do you have to be part of the yacht club, or if you buy one, you are? Okay, so those aren't necessarily connected. Okay, well, I'll just read this because I thought this was crazy, right? Yeah. So this is just craziness. Justin Bieber bought one of these apes. And so what that means is, does it mean they commissioned someone to do the art for them, or they saw the art and they bought it?
I think they saw the art.
They saw the art. Okay. And then they bought it. So Justin Bieber bought one for $1.3 million, supposedly. Other people like Paris Hilton, Gwyneth Paltrow, Steph Curry, Kevin Hart, Snoop Dogg, Eminem, like all these people are buying these things. And now apparently I guess there's like maybe a library of like 10,000 of these images worth $2.5 billion.
Well, yeah, it's OpenSea is the biggest place. Okay. You can go there, but it's
just crazy.
Well, I don't know how many of them are actually bought. So celebrity scams are huge in this area. So a lot of times they buy them for large amounts of money. But in reality, it's like somebody gives them the ether to buy it. You know, it's it's almost like a promotion.
Just to pump it.
Yeah. Type thing.
So this one, like I literally didn't know about this until I just started looking at NFTs, trying to understand better. CryptoPunk. This is Richard. This sold again. I don't know. Maybe it didn't sell. $9 million.
Yeah, they're crazy.
What is happening?
I don't get it.
I don't either. So anyways, those were just interesting to me. So I put them up there because I thought this was craziness, but it's fun to look at.
Yes.
And then the other thing that you might have alluded to, but was pretty interesting and makes you aware of like, okay, everybody is always looking for an angle on all these things, right? And so one of the things that's happened just this year, I think in January it got really bad, was these automated bots are grabbing artwork from like deviantart.com and I guess posting it maybe on OpenSea or somewhere else and then selling NFTs for artwork that they stole. Which again is just bizarre if you think the whole thing is strange if you think about it. Like that part makes sense, like that they're not that it's a good thing, but they're stealing it. They want to make money so they can do it. But why is somebody buying this? Like that makes even less sense than all these other things. Because I assume that person is getting ripped off because they're just buying a quote fake or a copy, but it's just bizarre. So I don't know. I can't make sense of that. Not asking you to make sense of it. I'm just commenting on the craziness.
Yeah, no, it's wild.
Yeah,
a lot of things out there, but
there are a lot. I think that's a great summary. There are a lot of things out there, and that's all we need to know.
Yeah, we have some guys on our team who like delve into NFTs and stuff like that.
So if they were here right now, would they be like, no, come on, man?
Well, some of them, they're like, it's cool. I got a cool picture. I'm like, but you spent $100 on it, man. Like, what are you talking about? Like, it's free.
And then you can go, well, hey, look, I have the same picture.
Well, and then some of them, like, it's the same kind of crowd that like tries to flip altcoins or shit coins. Right. They're trying to flip NFTs. Like, a lot of them think you're gonna buy one that's undervalued and then go sell it for $1 million, like one of these guys. But you're never going to. Yeah.
I mean, I think there is something. Well, I'll throw something out and tell me if this is a parallel, because it seems like it's a parallel. But, music, right? There's electronic copies of music. We all listen to it. We're all listening to a copy of something. But, you could go to a collector's home and see a platinum album on the wall, right?
Yeah.
And that's just like a unique representation of that music. So I don't even know if it's real platinum. Maybe it is. But, you've seen the pictures. People have these records on the wall that are whatever metal on there. But it's really meant to represent, I purchased this thing or I was given this thing that represents this song. That sounds like a similar kind of a thing, right?
Yeah,
so in the art
the
world,
idea of a status symbol.
Right. It's a status symbol to say, I can do this. And so I did do this. It's kind of that kind of a thing, right?
Yeah. Like, some of it's that... we don't need to get into a lot of it's just preying on people with financially desperate people who want to try and flip NFTs, but
right. But you don't think, like, one of the things we had talked about before in this next thing we're going to get into is Web3, that if you were a person who wanted to live in the metaverse as much as possible, right? Like, you wanted to have a really, most of your life you wanted to be in the metaverse. So therefore everything that you own is, just digital stuff, right? So if in the metaverse we're having this conversation, this bottle is just bits, and I could create 1 billion bottles easily with no cost. And so if I want one of these to have value, I attach an NFT to it. Now I understand, like, if I'm in Meta's metaverse or Facebook's metaverse, that they could just attach a value to it within their own system without an NFT. So you don't need an NFT to do that. But what if you want to take that value elsewhere? So eventually somebody could, outside of that metaverse, like, eventually I think it is safe to assume probably Google's going to try to have a metaverse, Facebook, maybe a few others. So I think there will be, competition out there to try to have people live or spend a lot of time in these virtual spaces. And so I could imagine somebody outside of those saying, well, we're going to create NFTs that will carry over into all of those, and we'll have our developers write APIs. So if you buy an outfit in this metaverse, and you go into this other one, you can have the same outfit.
It's the same as like with gaming, like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you have it in where you could take your sword from World of Warcraft and bring it over to Call of Duty or something like that?
Okay. Yep.
The main issue is that the game developers like minting it themselves,
right,
and selling it and making the money, and they haven't agreed to ever do the outside thing. So you would need some sort of outside thing.
So that's the key, is these people would have to open it up to an API that you could do that with,
right?
And they thus far with like game development, that just hasn't happened.
Like, well, because like, are you going to? Because the question is always like, are you going to play a game because you get to bring your outside goods? No, most of the time you play a game because it's a good game,
right?
And then that's just secondary,
right?
Like you, it's usually a bad game if people are there like farming money from it or something.
Okay.
And that's but you can get like really meta with it and say like. Meta, if you will. Like, you're probably going to be broke in the metaverse and not have anything due to artificially created scarcity. Which is like, like, if you're broke and don't have anything in the metaverse, like, it's a conscious decision from people to make it so that way you get value.
There are a lot of weird things about this, man.
Yeah. I mean, and then you're like, man, maybe.
I mean, to me, it's just
how does
odd.
Money work?
But yeah, but I don't know if you're old enough to have this happen. I am, okay?
Sure.
Where you can describe something to me that is perfectly normal. Like, I mean, I've seen this stuff and, done it a few times enough I understand it, but it's still very foreign to me, to watch someone else play video games. Right.
Yeah.
And so not only do people, very common, watch people play video games, they pay to watch other people play video games. But I didn't grow up with that, so it's very strange. So I've had enough things like that I can go, well, just because that doesn't make sense to me doesn't mean it won't be embraced by a lot of other people and become a thing, right? For
sure.
And so this whole idea of living in this metaverse, which seems very strange to me.
Yeah.
I read an article of a guy that spent a lot of time doing this. I think he was a programmer, but he's also a journalist or something. And so he did this and then kind of wrote about it. And he embraced this cypherpunk kind of culture. And so he loves the idea of living in the metaverse, which to me sounds miserable. But he talked about how he bought like this specific furniture so he could sit and program and like kind of feel like he was almost levitating. And then he chose his spot where he orbited around the Earth and you could see the Earth in the background. And he loved it. And he was like looking for more ways to stay in there, right, and find value in there and all these kinds of things. So I think that world is going to be there. I won't want to spend a lot of time in it. I don't know. Maybe I'll spend a little bit of time, but there will be people who probably want to spend way more time in it than I want to spend. And so that's where all these things maybe start coming together a little bit. I don't know. We'll see. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I think I come from the same perspective as you as far as like I don't quite get it.
Yeah.
And it's super interesting because I think, on more of like the philosophical level, whenever you're looking at like say the metaverse is early social media or something like that, if we could go back and say like we're building these platforms that people are going to spend hours and hours a day on, like this is going to be amazing. Like some people like doing it and it's like, man, like should we have like how would we go back and do it differently? Like I don't, like the same with that's like what we've talked about, and you were getting into Web3, like a lot of the people talking about building Web3, it's like we sort of messed up on Web 2.
Yes.
How would we fix this and get back to something, like Web 3 is almost like we're gonna take things off of data centers, get it back to on our own computers. We're gonna take things out of the hands of the major corporations and put it back into more of the cypherpunk movement. It seems like the metaverse in a way is actually not that.
That's what I was thinking. I mean, as I read about these things, like depending on who you read on this, the metaverse will come up. But it didn't make sense to me in terms of I think where we're going here, which is we're going to talk about, which is Web3. And but one of the, as I described the whole metaverse and the things I just talked about with you with a couple people, and I'll have to watch this because it sounds like a great movie, but several people was like, you need to watch Ready Player One, I think is what it's called. Yeah. So I said that's kind of like what you're describing. But again, I think as I understood Web3 a little bit more, I'm a little confused as to why the metaverse gets thrown in all the time with it.
There's NFTs. I think that's like the crossover. And that's
maybe the commonality there. Okay.
Yeah, well, I think the metaverse in a lot of ways, like trying to jump in Web3 is similar like when the big banks were running blockchain programs. Okay. It's like they're trying to
there's something here.
There's something
Let's
here.
See if we can catch that magic.
Yeah.
Okay.
See if you can capture.
All right. Well, let's do this now. Let's talk about Web3, and let's go. This is how I've seen it laid out, and I thought this was pretty helpful to talk about Web 1, Web 2, and Web 3. Because like you just mentioned, there was some thought on we didn't get this right. The original vision was this, and it kind of moved in this direction. Because I think this part is what really sheds light on the rest of our conversation of why there's this philosophical bent that's really important. And then after we get through Web3, we'll talk about the whole centralization, decentralization kind of in depth a little bit. So yeah, the idea here is that, we hear about this Web3, which means there was a Web 2 possibly and a Web 1.0, right? And so the Web 1.0 would be the original web, which I've heard people describe in helpful ways. Like that was the read version of the web where you would read stuff, but you wouldn't like be able to create a lot, or it wasn't the right.
Some people were creating, but
right, yeah. But that was like, so that timeline wise, I think was like, you'd say that started roughly like 1996 era with like AOL when it got like 5 million users.
Sure.
Sometime around that time frame.
Or even earlier, like the people running their own servers for emails and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
This was, like what Web 1 in my mind is just people. The way I differentiate it is like Web 1 was you actually had a server.
Okay. Like a BBS server.
Yeah, like a business. If you were running a website, you had a server in your place.
Okay, I got you. I got you. If you were doing it, you were hosting. You were hosting the hardware.
You were, people were connecting into your machine, and that's how it worked.
Oh, that's an interesting differentiation. Okay, that's helpful.
Yeah, and then Web 2 came about with the cloud, if you will.
Okay.
Whereas it's somebody else's computer, like the AOL was even AOL is like Web 2, like, Gmail, everything, like you don't control it.
Right.
And that's kind of where we messed up.
Yeah. And so where I see a lot of that described would be, this is actually, I think, a little bit later than what you just described, but they call it the read-write Web 2.0, and they would say that that's where like everything took off in terms of creating content like blogs, videos, apps, books. Like you could create it, but who's hosting that creation?
Who owns it?
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so if you think about the big players, they're players everybody's familiar with now. But again, if you juxtapose this against Web 1.0, you kind of see this differentiation. So the Web 2.0 players are, like in 2005, Facebook got like 2 million users. Twitter, 2007, got really big. YouTube, 2006. So this is about like 20 years after Web 1.0, roughly. I mean, give or take. And so you see like Facebook, Google, Twitter, Amazon, they're now really in control of any of the information, not any, but like the predominant amount of information everybody's consuming day in and day out on the internet, right? And that's Web 2.0, kind of how it's thought of. Is that right?
For sure.
Okay. And so that, from the original vision of the web, which was very decentralized, free, information's flowing freely between individuals, and now we have Facebook or Google or Twitter who can censor things or who have the power to...
originally they weren't, though. You know, if you remember, like, originally they almost had more of the Web 1 feel, like because like in my mind, like what was the goal of Web 1? It was this freedom of information. So like you had all of these different websites and blogs, and you could have news that wasn't just from a central news corporation. It would be lots and lots of people going there, and then like YouTube seemed sort of an extension of that. Same with like Facebook seemed almost an extension of that, and people are all posting their news up here, and we have this dynamic feed, and people can create videos, and you don't just have to rely on one content creator. You can rely on a whole lot of them, and this is great. And it was sort of, it had a feeling of Web 1 in a lot of ways, but then we sort of went down the path towards them becoming a monopoly, them sort of taking more control into their own hands, and then you sort of started seeing some censorship. You started seeing some government regulations, and that's sort of where it sort of became... People, especially in the Web3 world, were like, this is, maybe we shouldn't have done this. We sort of traded, because building things like Facebook or using those were much easier than hosting your own computer. And so people sort of traded the easier, traded, the decentralization for the speed and things like that.
All right. So if we go Web 1.0, oversimplification, but would be read. And you would tack on the end of that, I think, own, like you read it, but you're owning the hardware in a lot of cases. Who did it, right, in a lot of cases, which is interesting when we get back to Web 3.0.
At least that was like the cypherpunks, or at least they were. Okay.
Web 2.0 was kind of like read write, but there's these big companies who are like monopolies who are in charge of these things. Web 3.0, the vision is this, again, simplification of you read it, you can write it, you own it, right? And so it goes back to this dispersal, this decentralization of ownership. Is that Is that right?
And it's not even necessarily like we realize that people have a hard time sort of running their own stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you saw the node count there, people, not everyone is running a Bitcoin node or something like that, but the ownership isn't of these. It's not of these corporations. They're not beholden to government control anymore. They're not beholden to kind of corporate interests. It's just sort of there. It's this software that sort of works. So you could have eventually people want a Facebook or a Twitter or a YouTube that is hosted on top of Ethereum or something similar, and nobody can shut it down. Now it sort of has that feel, but it has the Web 1 ownership tied into it.
Okay. And to do that, I think, and this is where all this starts to come together, you need, as we've described it now, I'm not going to go through all that again, but you need a cryptocurrency. You need a blockchain. You need perhaps some form of like unique digital ownership, right? Like when all those things are there and working really well, and you could argue, are they right now or aren't they? Maybe we need to go further. But then that friction is gone. Like there's just this platform that can be assumed and you can work from it.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's sort of the path, I guess, that seems likely at the moment.
Right. And that's very different. It's hard to describe this, but that's very different than the world we're in right now, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that the biggest things that people are just going to realize that hopefully you don't notice a difference. Things might be slightly different, but the biggest differences are going to be like it just works, and there isn't sort of these political discussions about shutting anything down or taking these things off. It's just that's impossible.
Right.
So we're just going to leave it up there.
Yeah.
And then we'll have to deal with the consequences later.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's going to be, it'll be a cool shift to see when it actually happens.
Interesting. Okay. And I've heard people talk about Web3 through the lens of creator consumer, and that there becomes a more direct, or can be a more direct connection between the creator and the consumer. Does that make sense? Have you heard that? Is that something you think is a valid way of looking at it?
I mean, some people talk about that.
Okay, so it can be, but not necessarily. Is that what you're...
Yeah, it can be. This is, I sort of disagree with some people in the space here. Even like some people are like, oh, well, music, for instance, like nobody, we don't compensate musicians well enough is a common thing. And if we get back to like, if you mint an NFT with your song and then you can automate streams to it and stuff like that. But, to be honest, like to me, you pay for things that people, that you want people to make, not things that people make already for free.
Yeah.
And music in my mind is one of those things that we all kind of just want to create. And,
although there is a sense of, there's the tip jar, or there's a guy opening up his guitar and you can throw some cash in. So does this, if this exists and that friction's gone, could that shift that, right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe.
But that's just another version of that,
jar.
Right? It's not like it didn't exist before and now it does. It's just an electronic version of that, perhaps.
Sure.
So it's not really...
But you could build that in the Web 2 world.
Yes.
You could have Venmo linked up to that and nobody would really care.
Yep. Okay.
Same with like artists and stuff like that. There's just such a... People are doing this stuff, and I think... Yeah, that's more of a factor in my mind of you're creating a podcast because we have access to amazing technology that allows you to have this amazing equipment now and record and post online. So you're just going to get more of them.
Okay. Do you know of any examples, or do some come to mind that are interesting or noteworthy to you, of what you might call Web3?
It's actually,
I know there's like this, it's like I'm asking you like, well, there's this term, we're not really sure what it means, but do you know anything that is that?
Yeah, no, it's super tough because it's honestly, it's such a vague term. I try to avoid it in some ways.
Okay. Well, let me ask you if you heard of a couple of different things that sound kind of interesting to me that some people claim to be Web3.
Sure.
So, one of them was when I just had to laugh because I just done some research on this. I hadn't heard about this. I guess it's a company, but this product in a long time. So Facebook got really into a lot of trouble at one point, but because they like sold people's data to some group, I can't remember the name of it now, and everybody's really upset about it, and it was understandable they were upset. And so a few people did this, but one group went off and said, we're creating a new Facebook. It was called Diaspora. Do you remember that?
I do not.
Okay.
I remember what they were doing, but
yeah.
I didn't.
So anyways, they're one now that's like a social network that's supposed to be kind of like a decentralized, set of nodes that allow you to have social networking, but in a decentralized fashion. So that sounds like a thing that's, somewhat like a Web3 kind of a thing. You ever heard of a company called Presearch?
I have.
So to me, they're interesting just because I could actually get my mind around what the heck they're doing because I use search all the time. And so I'm like, oh, okay. I know what search does, but my understanding of their thing is, they're doing search. But for instance, I might do this because it sounded really interesting. I can get, I don't remember the terminology they use, but like a node up and running and become, part of their search. So if somebody searches, I might
host
my machine might answer one of the searches, right? And so the idea is that search is literally a decentralized search. So if you take my node out, it doesn't really matter. There's still a million other nodes out there. So that sounds to me like something very similar to what we're talking about, right?
Sure.
You can't shut it down. It's decentralized. It's performing this really pretty useful function. So I don't know. Anything else come to mind like that?
Nah, I mean, crypto's Web3. That's
yeah. Okay.
That's
well, and then we talked about it at the beginning, but just the idea of this money flowing to Ukraine, like so faster than you could probably do it in any other way, right? Where
did you see they were thinking about minting NFTs?
I did. I saw that.
Ukrainian's finance minister was going to mint NFTs and sell them to people to donate, but then they backed off doing it.
Okay. And that's like literally in the last day or so.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, they would have if you sold a bunch of NFTs, like they were probably going to break a bunch of financial laws. And
okay.
It was, here it's selling them to U.S. people.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was like, can Ukraine right now break finance laws? Like, I don't know, maybe.
Yeah. Well, the thing I saw before that was the thing how they had made whatever $40-some million by people donating money. And then, so these are the things, just so you know, people like me and people who are going to be watching this are just very confused by some of these things. So I read this one sentence and it was something like, Ukraine has made $44 million off of donations and they're thinking about airdropping all those people, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. I'm like, what is an airdrop? Like, what does that even mean? And so I read a little bit and I guess it's like when people do this, the person who's receiving the money from you or the coin gives something back. What are they giving back?
Well, sometimes they actually, sometimes we'll give you like a token or like an NFT to say thank you.
Yeah. And you said you love airdrops? Is that sarcastic or is
no,
that you actually love airdrops?
So like in the past, like some, and they still do it. So like Uniswap had a really big one, Gitcoin. So like if you, Gitcoin was like you did work. It was sort of like an Upwork platform, where you would go and you would get jobs to say like, oh, can you help me fix this issue? And in like the early, back whenever I was broke doing my startup, I would go on there and like help people solve some of their issues and get some money. Okay. Well, they launched a token later, so they launched a token like last year. Yeah. And how did they distribute their token initially? So they didn't they started with an initial supply, and instead of just giving it to the team, they airdropped like half of it to former people who had used the platform. Right. So I made some money off of using it in the past, and it was awesome. Okay, it was like so free cash. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of times it's another one was like Uniswap. That
does sound great. That sounds like a great thing.
Well, because usually you don't expect them. So like it was like there was another one, decentralized exchange. So if you had used the decentralized exchange, they airdropped you some of their token when they launched. Okay. And it was like just like free money.
So I've heard some really interesting stuff with that. And so when they do that, they're dropping it in to your wallet.
To your wallet that was interacting with their thing.
Which is, something we hadn't talked a lot about. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but wallet is like a public address where people can just drop money in or you can exchange, you can send money from there, right? Is that the idea? But I heard a story against Vitalik when he was getting interviewed. And I won't remember all the details, but it was crazy. So because he's one of the founders or creators of Ethereum, he has a lot of weight in the crypto community, obviously, right? And so I guess this has happened a few times where these people will drop money into his wallet and then make a big press release saying, hey, look at how much Thor, crypto that, Vitalik has. Look, my Thor crypto is awesome. You should buy some of this. If he's buying it, you should buy it, right? To pump the price up. And so some company did this or a group did this, and the price went up, and it was like, for whatever period of time, it was worth a lot of money, like millions and millions of dollars. And so he took, I forget, I won't get all the details right, but he took like half of it, gave it to a charity, many, many millions of dollars, gave it to a charity, and he, quote, burned the rest of it, which I guess means he just deleted it.
Yeah.
And then like kind of made public like what happened.
Yep.
That's crazy. Like
yes.
He literally, like these people did this, and he literally eventually it turned into real money for a charity based on this fraudulent kind of a token. Crazy thing. So
yeah, no, he actually, with our project is sort of famous because we were one of the first projects to ever do that to his. We personally didn't do this to him. But somebody in our community, like who held tokens, thought it would be a good press idea just to send some to him. Give some to him, right? And start tweeting it out. And so we became like the token that did this shady thing to Vitalik, and we're like, guys, we had no idea. But
somebody just stuck it on there. And so he probably has that happen like all the time, I guess.
Yeah,
right?
he has tons of. Well, I mean, he doesn't need money anyway, but
yes, yeah. Okay, interesting. Okay, so we're gonna move on here to just the kind of stepping away from specifics there with NFTs and crypto and blockchain, and just talk a little bit more about just stepping back, like decentralization as a whole, and like why that's this major part of everything we've been talking about. So it's definitely come up a few times, but like I said, as I read more about this, I came to understand like this is the central core thing to cryptocurrency. I'm not saying every cryptocurrency cares about this, but it seems like the big Ethereum, Bitcoin, you listen to like how they came about and the founders when they talk about things, and then you get into blockchain and all that. Like decentralization is really, really important. And so I think it's like worth just talking about that for a minute, and I'm going to just put something up here. So for me, like I understand decentralization pretty quickly, being in programming, but if somebody hasn't programmed, they're not necessarily going to be able to maybe picture what that means. So I'll just throw something up here, and people that are listening will maybe try to describe this a little bit. But you kind of have these two models. On the left there's the centralized model, and on the right would be like a decentralized.
I think I used this exact picture.
Are you serious? Yeah, you Google it and like, oh, that one looks pretty cool. All right. I added the red on there so people would actually be able to see what the heck are they talking about. But, on the left we have what's considered centralized, which again, for people who are listening, it's kind of like a
hub and spoke model.
Yes, thank you. Like a wagon wheel, right? A hub and spoke. And then on the decentralized, how would you describe that to people who can't see it?
Cluster.
A cluster. Yeah, a cluster of dots. We would say nodes that are connected by a lot of lines. And there's a lot of pathways between all those nodes, right?
Yeah, if you take one out, everyone's still connected.
Yeah, so there's a couple things here, right? So one is on the left, you got this big red dot in the middle. That's all. Everything's got to flow through that, right? So if I'm a yellow dot and I want to send it to a blue, I got to go through there, right? Or if I want to receive something from the other side, same way. So you can look at that a couple ways. That dot can be the gatekeeper. Like it can actually be actively saying, I will decide if you get to send that over there or not. But it can also just functionally be like, if it disappears, it can't work anymore. Even if it's not trying to stop people from crossing through that path, if it doesn't exist anymore, it's broken. And it's the same thing as somebody saying you can't do it, right? And so that's centralization. And decentralization is over on the right, where we have all these nodes connected by multiple paths. There's one red dot there, But if you blow away that red dot, there's still many, many paths to get from one node to another. Right?
Yeah, and I mean, even usually in most decentralized systems, something that we like to look for is, can you just add one? Can you become another one?
Okay.
If you can't become another one, it's a sort of a red flag. Usually you want, whether it's a Bitcoin miner, like even though it's really hard, you can go do it.
Right.
Same with like if you want to be an Ethereum miner or an Ethereum node, like anybody can join. And that's super important, because then even if all these guys knew each other and went down, you could still pop one up and be okay.
Right. And so I think what people need to understand that kind of came to me as I learned more about this, and again, correct me if I'm wrong or add to this, whatever, but a lot of the challenges with cryptocurrency or challenges in Bitcoin, they're challenges because the people who designed them really, really, really wanted to make sure they were decentralized. And if they didn't, those challenges wouldn't exist. Like the reason why you can only do 7 transactions, or the reason why the blockchain is the size that it is, and it needs multiple people looking at it, like, is decentralization. Like, it's a philosophical, foundational thing to say this thing needs to be decentralized. And decentralization doesn't just mean it can mean multiple things. It can mean like one person making a decision, but it can also be, for example, like the blockchain thing. So if eventually the blockchain got so big that the only people that could host it would be Amazon or Google, because they have this massive infrastructure, it just became centralized again. Correct. Right? So that is the problem as well, is trying to figure out how to solve, which is like a massive
keep it
problem.
Decentralized.
And again, you've been in this world for a long time, so I'm just have this thin little slice of seeing into it. But when I saw that interview with Vitalik, it was like, you can tell he's spending a lot of time trying to figure these problems out. And he's not going to just go, well, we'll just skimp on that. Like he's trying to find ways to really, really solve these problems of decentralization, but being able to still do all the things we talked about with crypto, with blockchain. And so those things were not obvious to me at all on a surface level understanding of crypto. So,
for sure. Yeah. I mean, there's a reason, like, we're built on top of Ethereum. It's, it costs us $20 to send my token to people. It's expensive, and it'll take 30 seconds. Like it's not that fast. Yeah. But you want to be on something that's decentralized. Like, so, you don't compromise on them.
So let me get to, like, people might go, why is that so important? Yeah. And so I'll throw an example out, and you tell me if this captures the spirit of it a little bit, trying to get people to understand. So a lot of it, I think, when I understand decentralization within this world that we're talking about, it doesn't have to go to finance, but a lot of times it's around finance. And so that's kind of hard for people to get their heads wrapped around. And so I thought, well, let's transfer to something else for a second and then come back and say, now this applies to finance. So in the world we live in here, and Frederick, most of the people are going to be watching this, we've grown up and just assume that we have freedom of the press, freedom of speech. But what if you didn't, right? Like, what if you took all those things away, as we're very aware of right now with world events, and you said there's one central control over who can say what and over who can print what? Like, there's no way we would ever put up with that. We would think that's insane to revert back to that world. And we would do anything that we had to create technology, to create something to make sure that we kept a world in which we had the freedom to say what we wanted. We had the freedom to get our information from where we wanted. I could spew information out and tell people what I wanted to tell them. And that just seems foundational to us. And so my understanding is that's kind of how people are thinking about finance, and it's different. Like, a lot of us we swim in the water that we're in, right? And but people outside in the crypto world are saying it doesn't have to be this way. It can actually be very different than it is right now, and different meaning thinking this is going to be a lot better in a lot of different ways. Is that? a fair kind of like analogy?
Yeah, no, I think there's like a lot of idealists kind of in the cryptocurrency world for those, like we obviously say like, we come from a country with a very stable banking system and a very stable currency, and we're very blessed in that manner. But, the early days of Bitcoin, we would talk about banking the unbanked, so like you could have, there are people in the world without a bank account. You actually don't need one anymore. Like if you can, if cryptocurrency takes off, it becomes the bank. Everybody can sort of be their own bank. And that was something that was super powerful. And then even there was, Bitcoin was probably earlier on was like maybe like libertarian rights, you could say, like more economic freedom. And then now you're seeing a lot more, maybe like the economic left coming in and saying you can use things to rework how finance laws work for distributional purposes, for even whether it's the free speech pieces that, which may be more on the left or something like that. So just these pieces of like, we want these freedom preserving technologies and we're going to create them so that way you guys can't mess with us.
Right.
And it's super tough because like, especially coming from, like our position in the world, we don't necessarily have a need as much for these things, but
it's not as obvious to us. Right. I mean, there is, I think the term again that gets used a lot is friction. There's a lot of friction in our finance system, right? Anybody who's ever signed a mortgage, like there's a lot of friction there, meaning like there's a lot of people that have to be involved. And when you sign on the dotted line, you see a fee for this, fee for this, fee for this, and you're like, what the heck did that person do for my mortgage? That's some of the friction that we're talking about, right?
Yeah, I mean, but a lot of those things, like I think a lot of those things could just be handled like they should be handled by just our regulators and our government, and to say like, this is ridiculous, get rid of it. Like, let's go digital, guys. Like it's 2022.
Okay. Yeah. Right.
Like you could get 90% of the way there just like by doing common sense things. Yeah. But we all can't agree on it because somebody will lose a job. Some of those things are tough, but it's, like the bigger, one thing I like to think about in terms of like, when it comes to being censorship resistant or getting around regulations is like back to the music and technologies about, the old peer-to-peer pirating of music software. Just because it came about and everyone started downloading LimeWire or Napster, it really changed the whole music model in the whole industry. And even though now we don't pirate music's free. Right. And so you could say it sort of did its job, and now you sort of know that if the music industry's ever acted up again and tried to charge you, $10 for a song or something like that, like we would all just go back to pirating music, and that would be great. Because the technology's there. And I think I think you'll see that with cryptocurrency is, once say you have private cryptocurrencies that anybody can get into easily, and they're not quite as volatile. If you assume that exists, if a government is thinking about printing a lot of money and debasing their currency, and they're going to have 10% inflation, they're going to think twice because everybody's going to run to a stable currency. Right. And that's what's going to be really powerful because it's going to be just this check on governments across the world. Yep.
Okay. We touched on it a little bit before about the idea, like, is crypto is not really anonymous. It's the term is pseudonymous, I think, if I got that right. Which means you have an address that's out there. Everybody knows the address, but you, in theory, could be hidden so that people don't know.
So there's ways
John
to
Thor
anonymize
behind that address, right? But I mean, there are ways, but apparently maybe they don't work that well, right? Because
usually people mess up,
right? Yeah. So the story that I read that was like really interesting was recently. I think it was actually just in February. So back in I think it was like 2016, there were I think it was like 120,000 Bitcoins stolen from some exchange, and so that was 6 years ago. And so the couple, they're not being accused of stealing it, but they were, they had these coins apparently. So they were in their possession, and they were arrested just in February. And they found them essentially. They found that they followed the trail, and apparently caught some people who they're saying they were arrested. I guess they still have to have their day in court, but that apparently stole or was in the chain of people who had stolen these Bitcoins. So it's not anonymous, right? Like you can follow this path.
Yeah, but that couple was hilarious. If you watched,
I saw pictures. The pictures look pretty funny.
Did you watch any of the rap videos on?
No.
You can go on Twitter and watch the rap videos. Okay. So the wife was a wannabe rapper.
See, these stories are amazing. I didn't know this. I wish I would have followed up on that.
She was like a wannabe SoundCloud rapper. It's if you watch these videos of them, it's they were almost special ed.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And so it was. Yeah, so
okay.
it was just super funny.
All right. So it was just kind of interesting. Another question I'll throw out to you, because I think you've maybe said something like this before or something along these lines. But, do you think we'll eventually get back to buying pizzas with cryptocurrency?
Sure. I think there's a few pizza shops that
okay.
Take it already.
All right. So maybe, but it's not real prevalent.
Yeah, no. But I think eventually you will.
Okay.
There's enough people in crypto now that I think it'll just be seamless, similar to just pay,
right,
and it automatically goes there.
Yeah.
So
any predictions is that next 5 years, you think?
Yeah, but within the next 5 years it'll be really, really seamless to just pay with your cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
Which is going to be awesome.
Yeah, that would be cool. So something that you can speak to, as I was communicating with you and trying to learn a little bit more about your company, I was learning some cultural stuff. I'm like, oh man, I got so many things to learn, which is exciting. But the communication tools of the crypto community, some of these are new to me. I've heard of them, but not using them all the time. So it seems like, looking into crypto, but then looking into your company and some other things, like there's some communication tools that are real prevalent that aren't necessarily outside of the crypto world. Like, well, I should say my world, I guess. So Telegram is the secure instant messaging kind of platform, right? Mm-hmm. And that is like, if you're in crypto, you're probably communicating over Telegram. Is that right?
Yeah, most likely.
Yeah. Discord. So I, logged into Discord, and again, terminology is with all this stuff when you just try to learn and talk about it. Like, am I saying the right words? I logged into, I think, the Tellor server, went to some channels, I think, or these rooms. What are they? Are they channels? Okay. Yeah. I think I went to some of your channels, tried to look around a little bit.
Nice.
Discord's interesting. It looks like it's a platform. Well, go ahead and tell me. What is
originally.
It? Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a channel for gaming, but now people use it for, you can host your own for a cryptocurrency and have these different things. We have like one for developers, one for, say, like miners, one for, just random people asking questions. We have a meme channel. We have people who want to talk about the price of our coin.
But it's like multi-medium, right? So it can you can text, you can video chat.
Yeah, video chat. You can post videos. You can post pictures, whatever you want.
Yeah. I heard one guy I was working with, we were talking about this, and he said his son was in college, and he said, yeah, my son just hangs out in this Discord channel all day, and all his friends are on it, and they just sit there and do their homework while they're on the Discord channel. It's like, what? He's like, yeah, they just kind of, that's how they kind of hang out together.
You can be in a private one with just your friends. You can make one and hang out.
I looked into it a while back over the pandemic. I bumped into Discord because I was trying to find a way. On Fridays, we would do this 3 at 3 where we play like 3 songs on Friday. And I was like, I want to keep that going. And I was trying to figure out how could we like have Spotify running, but have us all in like a room together virtually. And Discord kind of popped up with that, but I never got anywhere with it because it would require everybody here to like install it. And
you can just use the web version.
Yeah. But you have to have a log. It's just this big thing. It would be like, what's Discord? I don't want to log into Discord. But but it's really cool. And then Medium. So Medium is like a website, but it seems like that's predominantly a way
for blogs.
Okay, all right.
People post blogs there.
Just communicating.
Yeah, well, I mean, so like I was just out at ETHDenver, and it was super funny because like we had a booth there, and people would come up and, they'd be promising projects. Oh, like connect with me. And it would be like, what's your Telegram?
Yep.
So you would enter in your Telegram, or the other most common one was, what's your Twitter?
Yeah.
So we would follow each other on Twitter and message each other. Anyways, I didn't exchange one business card. So.
Oh yeah.
That's good.
Yeah, that is good. So, and then there's I saw when I was in your guys' channels, I don't know, this past couple of days, a lot of people putting GM in there.
Good morning.
Yeah, so I looked that up, and it can mean like multiple things, it seems like.
I don't know. That's not me. So.
Okay. All right.
There's a GM crowd there.
Okay. So, all right, we'll skip that one because it seems like there's a few things that it can mean there, but so, is there anything we've talked a lot about some of this we've already touched on, but I guess before we move into Tellor and talking about what you guys do, there's a few things I want to just leave you the opportunity to talk about broadly. Anything we haven't touched on that you look at crypto and blockchain and you say these technologies take things that we used to be able to do, but it just makes them now like way easier, removes the friction from them that kind of stand out to you. I mean, finance, a lot of things in finance, I guess we've talked about, but no, anything?
I mean, unless you want to go deep into finance, but it's
no, I don't want to go deep into finance.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing I think is just the innovation is blowing up. Like if you wanted, before 5 years ago, if you wanted to make a new type of financial product, you worked at UBS or Goldman Sachs.
Okay.
And you wanted to test it out. And now, like, we went to a hackathon and there were 18-year-old kids building like new financial derivative products and coming up with things, it's super cool. Just the innovation in the space has just exploded. Different models for what if we have an exchange that's just different types of auctions and they're settled at different times. Now you can test out exchange theory in a matter of minutes. And same with innovations on monetary policy. So we have our own currency, other people have their own currencies. What should we have the inflation rate be? What should inflation go towards? How do you have a system for treasuries? Do you have a system for debt?
You can just make those decisions.
Maybe. Yeah. You have 18,000 of them now experimenting with it, so I'm a Federal Reserve chairman basically. And, so what in the past was reserved for, PhD economists who are very, very senior, now every kid in their 20s can go play around with it. So it's super awesome.
So that was a great summary. That does sound very interesting. And I could see why, if you were an economist or you're studying, economics, you'd be all over
you have
that.
to get in there. This is and there's nobody doing research on it. Somebody needs to sit down and analyze how it all works.
Probably. I mean, I'm sure some of this is obvious to you, but I'm just listening and thinking, oh my gosh, this sounds amazing. I mean, it probably even opens up opportunities you would not have had before to even experiment with economic theories and models that you couldn't do before, right? But now because you can create these microcosms and play with them, you can see how they work.
Yeah, and same with corporate theory. People are doing, you could actually do a system with Uber where every time you rode in an Uber car ride, you get a share of Uber.
Yeah.
You can do that now, and people are doing that sort of thing. So you can completely flip on its head every single corporate law we have in the books because everyone's just ignoring them over in the crypto space, and it's awesome.
Huh. Wow. Okay. That's amazing.
Yeah. So most of them will probably be losers because they're 20-year-olds and managing inflation policies. But we're going to learn a whole lot, and there's going to be a lot of winners too.
Yeah.
So,
is there anything that you can think of that, and I don't know, maybe you just described it, because there's this shift of power from these big companies that you had to be in one of those companies if you were going to be trying to make those decisions. So maybe you would say that you just described this shift, but is there anything that you would look at before and say, well, this is kind of impossible, and now it's possible because of these technologies?
I mean, there actually, I know we talked a little bit about that. Privacy isn't possible, or privacy isn't the best. But there are actually a lot of privacy features that are coming online, and that people are playing with. So like, really being able to do some, have digital cash is something that's super cool.
Yeah.
Really getting around some regulations and some things. Like in the future, it's going to be one of these problems where like, it's going to be hard to tell people they owe taxes. And it's going to be a serious problem for governments everywhere. Like, like whenever you can really make all of your messaging private and you can really make all of your financial transactions private, like what are you going to do? So it'll be interesting.
Okay.
So it'll be like going to a fully cash economy. Like governments would be in trouble.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So I was listening to a podcast, I mentioned it earlier, about, they were interviewing a guy who wrote, a book about Silicon Valley, kind of focusing on PayPal. And they were interviewing him, and they said, the
PayPal Mafia, or what do they call him?
Might have been. Yeah. It might have been. But what the guy was asking him is, he was reading about this, and these guys are probably about 10 years younger than me. So they were probably, I think they were probably in their teens during like the .com boom. And so they're asking this guy some questions as they read the book, and they said, I look back at that time, with the .com boom and all these companies that, there was a crash, but of course there were a lot of companies that kind of came out of that were incredibly successful. And he said, as I read the book, it just seemed like there was this ethos of like, we can do anything, and we can build it, we can do this, and just this incredible mindset of like, let's just build stuff, let's just make things that people never thought we could do before. And he asked the guy, it seems like that's gone now. Like, where did that go? And that's as I'm trying to learn about these things that we're about to talk about, and I'm thinking, what is he talking about?
It's
like
crypto now.
It's crypto. It is like, and that's as he said that, I thought, no, this is where it is, right? It's in crypto. This is where visionaries are building things. Some of it is for now, but a lot of it is for future, right? It's like this, if I build this now, when the technology comes along, I'm going to be right there, and I'm going to be ready. And so people are building with big visions and big ideas. And that's really pretty exciting. And I assume that your company is one of those. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of like why I got into it and sort of fell in love with the space in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But like PayPal, like they have a lot of sort of crypto roots too, and like one of my favorite early PayPal stories. Like I think it was like Elon told the story, and he was saying that they hired a lawyer as like one of their first employees, early employees, and the lawyer was like, guys, like I think all of this stuff is illegal. Like,
oh, really?
we're breaking a lot of laws, and they fired him.
Oh, is that right?
And kept doing what they were doing and kept scaling, and I was like, that's like totally crypto.
Yeah, man, that's pretty wild. So do you think? Well, do you feel like that is kind of the ethos of the crypto world? Like,
yeah, well, I mean, so like I used to work at a regulatory agency too, so it's just one of these things that's moving so fast that like the regulators can't keep up, and like you could wait and ask for permission, but everyone's just like, we'll do that later.
But it also feels like there's this unbelievable growth, so there's a lot of money getting funneled in, and so there's a lot of ideas, and so I'm assuming, as with the .com boom and bust, there's going to be a bust, right? And what I mean by that is,
we've had lots of them.
Okay. And what I mean by that is people who have ideas, but they're just not good ideas. But it takes a while to figure out that idea wasn't a good idea, right? And so those are floating around out there, I assume.
Yeah. Well, you have a lot of zombie companies in the crypto space too that have like, they launched in 2017 with a big ICO. They raised $100 million, and then their product went nowhere, and now they just have $90 million still in they're around. So it happens.
So one more thing, and then we'll talk about Tellor. And this is just more current event stuff that popped up. I was like, wow, it's just crazy, the stuff going on with Russia and Ukraine, and how there's a lot of stuff related to crypto there. So I was thinking about a world where crypto was 100% successful, and there was, a Bitcoin or Bitcoin-like cryptocurrency that was worldwide. It was a currency, not an investment. You can move it around a lot, and then something like this happens with Russia and Ukraine. And I was thinking, and this, there's no. I think the answer is might be like, yep, that's the world we're going to live in. But it was interesting just to think about everything we've done thus far. The U.S. has done has been through sanctions, and those sanctions have been through control of the dollar and or control of a bank or banks.
Yep.
And if that world exists that we just described, those aren't going to do anything, right?
Sure.
And so then, when we look at right now, when we look at diplomacy, or we look at what does it look like to do things before you do kinetic warfare, those options don't exist anymore. So like, oh my gosh, that's pretty crazy to think about that.
Well, they could. I mean, so there's like two, obviously like you could still send money over in Russia then, and they could potentially get around it. But like the question would be like, if it is this world, does Russia have their own currency still? And like I would say, like if a country doesn't have their own currency and you're sort of using other people's currency, it's actually a whole lot harder to go to war when you don't have your own currency, because you can't print money to go to war. So like it solves a little bit of it in some ways, or at least you want to do some smaller wars, because that are a little bit less expensive. So I think that would be a benefit. But yeah, in a lot of ways, like you couldn't bully them in that manner. But it's definitely one of those things, like freedom preserving technologies in general usually don't help the people you agree with.
Right. And that's the thing you have to understand is obviously you can paint a picture and go, is this a good time for crypto to do its thing or a bad time for it to do its thing? And it's just going to depend on the scenario. But it was just interesting to think about that, like, oh my gosh, like a lot of what's happening right now is dependent on we control the dollar and we can control banks.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's kind of like protecting free speech laws. Like you're not protecting normal people's free speech laws. Like you're protecting the neo-Nazi or someone that like you completely disagree with. But like, like we give you free speech too. Sorry, man. So crypto is sort of a similar thing. Like you're going to probably be, you're creating things that will probably be abused, but it's there's benefits to it. Yeah.
So we definitely touched on it just a couple times here with Tellor, but talk a little bit more about Tellor's role. And you mentioned early on, I think when we were talking about oracles. Yeah. And that was something really until I started trying to understand your company a little bit more. I didn't know anything about oracles, even though I'd heard about blockchain, I heard about cryptocurrency. I just didn't understand. I was like, what is this? And it was really interesting. And so I'll just say one thing and then let you talk a little bit. But the first thing that I didn't understand, and you've explained a little bit, was like, oh, this is because Vitalik this group designed the blockchain in a way that information can only get in a very specific manner. Right. And it can't be dynamic. And I'm like, oh, well, that creates a real problem. And so that, you want to talk about your company and that problem and how you guys are trying to solve it?
We're the access to off-chain information. The way that we sort of do that, we call it like a blockchain native solution in a way. So we tried to build it in a way that was sort of fit with our ethos of we want something that is fully decentralized. Like that was like, we're just going to do this. We're not going to cut any corners. And the way that we do that is we have a network of reporters. So if John, say he wants the price of oil on chain, so I'll be the reporter. So I would stake some TRB. So I would take TRB as our token, the Tellor token. You would lock it into a smart contract. You would lock 100 of these. So right now it's like $2,000. You would lock into the smart contract, and then he would come on and say, "Hey, I'll pay whoever gives me the price of oil $5 in tokens." And then myself and all of the other people who have staked to their Tellor tokens can compete to answer his question. Okay. So we would say, and anybody can become a reporter. All you have to do is stake some tokens. They would compete. Somebody would throw on a price and say, hey, it's this amount. And then everybody else would look at it, and let's say I put it on chain. If I was honest, it would just stay on chain and he could read it and his smart contract could use it. If I lied, somebody would quickly say that I lied. They would dispute me. Okay. So they would pay a small fee, and then it would go to a vote as far as whether or not I lied. And then that's basically the whole system.
Okay.
It's a nice, simple system that guarantees as long as you're paying for data, somebody's going to throw it up there, and anybody can participate in it. And it's secure in the manner. So it's similar to a blockchain. Obviously, if it costs only $2,000, like I could put on a false value. It cost me $2,000. But the thing is we use finality. So you wouldn't want to read the price of oil right away. You would want to wait for a dispute. So if I lied, somebody else is actually now incentivized to get your reward. And they would say, oh, it's this. And somebody else would put it on. And if they lied, so then basically it would cost them $2,000 every single time they would want to lie. And then it would cost them a lot of time to lie. And that's how it works.
So the reason why this is so important is because, and we haven't spent much time on this because it's just another complexity that we don't have time for, but is, to do contracts, right? You need information in to feed into a contract typically, right? There's some information you're acting on, like a price of something. And so that information needs to get in there. And again, it goes back to this philosophy of, okay, do we really want this to be decentralized or don't we? Because there are other ways to get that information in there. Like you described the guy in London, right?
Yeah.
He's just popping it in there through a JavaScript or whatever it was. He's just grabbing the information.
Yeah, you could have Scott or whoever
API.
here say, he'll be our source of the price of oil.
Right. And technically that satisfies the information that needs to get in there, and then this contract can run and do its thing, right? And that doesn't break anything in Ethereum as far as Ethereum's concerned. But information in a contract is really, really important. Like if I sign a mortgage, it matters to me a lot what the percentage rate is that I'm paying, right? Like obviously that's like probably the most important piece of information in there. And so how that gets in there is very important. Is that, is it accurate? And so what your company is doing is taking that philosophy, that foundational piece of making sure that this whole system is decentralized and saying, well, how are we going to make the information that goes into this go in a way that can be decentralized as well? Is that right?
Yeah, no, that's completely correct.
Yeah.
So
okay. And that's not easy to do. Right?
No.
And so that's why you have this, it's almost like a communal governance model for information gathering, right?
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to make.
So you have to create like incentives, and you have to create some kind of governance, some kind of rules.
Yeah, so how do you vote on, it's like you have to build the whole system. So, like we have a currency for staking. How much do people have to stake? You have how do you sort of have an inflation rate? What does the inflation rate go towards? The other thing is like, how do you vote on disputes? Is it purely, we've gone from, do you just like whoever holds a token gets a vote? Or do you give special privileges to reporters or to users or to the team? Other things you can do, we had the discussion last year, we had a delegation. So like, can you delegate your votes? That's like a decision that, maybe you don't want to vote all the time and you just trust me to do it for you. Yeah. These are like more political science governance decisions, but they're the ones that we kind of have to deal with.
So is another concept, is this similar to what an oracle is? So, people are familiar with notaries. It can be similar to a notary. I mean, a notary maybe doesn't come up with the information, but they kind of stamp it and say, "Hey, this is correct," and I mean, maybe you'd say true or accurate or it's like verified.
Crypto-economically secured.
Yeah. So are they in a sense they're also providing the information, but they're also they're the trusted source,
right?
Kind of like a notary is. Is that fair?
Yeah, some people have some competitors even use the term notary.
Okay.
So
it's interesting.
Yeah, you're on brand.
Okay. Well, for people who don't understand the concepts, they can
Yes.
say it's kind of like a notary. Right?
Yeah.
They're trusted like a notary would be trusted.
Difference between like a middleware notary, if you will.
Okay. And so with oracles, from what I'd read, there's like these different kinds of oracles, like hardware, software. And then I saw this one that was the consensus oracle. Are you guys like a consensus oracle, or are those categories just somebody made those categories up?
I don't know that one. So.
Okay. All right. All right. All right. That was, like I said, the whole oracle thing was very new to me, and I didn't understand it, and so
yeah, I mean, it got me.
But it makes sense. Like when you
Sure.
start thinking about the information, you're like, yeah, where is this information coming from? You know?
Well, smart contracts are just so limited. If you can't, like everything has to be internal to the blockchain. So like, they're kind of boring without oracles, if you will.
Yeah.
Like think about financial contracts that you can't bet on any commodity or stock or anything. You can just bet on cryptocurrencies on that chain.
Right.
It's like sort of lame. So
yeah.
now you can spice things up.
So question, just pivoting a little bit here, but your company's been around for a while, so you guys had to, like a lot of people, make it through this pandemic.
Sure.
So what was that like for you all?
So I mean, Tellor started officially in like 2019. I've been
just before then.
Yeah,
Okay.
just before, and then I mean, we were doing the derivatives until January of 2019.
Okay.
So it was, I mean, the same three people in the company, but it was
okay.
Yeah, no, it was. Luckily, crypto did really well during the pandemic, so it wasn't as bad. I mean. So in early 2019, we got into an incubator out in Berlin. So we went out to Berlin for like 8 weeks, and that was a blast. And that like kind of kick-started Tellor launching. And then in August of 2019, we launched the token and everything. And then we were like the token, like we like couldn't get anybody to use it at first, and like it was like you were like literally just burning through cash, paying gas fees on the network because it was just an early project that we used, and then like luckily like in December, so like from August to December we're like, man, we're going away. and then in December we got some traction, and the token took off a little bit.
Great.
And then we're like, all right, like I remember it was like an important milestone when it's like, guys, like we can pay our salaries this month.
Awesome.
Yes. Like,
that's great.
This is great. And then like, cause like we had tried raising money and we just were no good at raising money. I mean, it was, so 2018 to 2019 was kind of like a bear market for crypto. So everything was kind of, you had the 2017 peak, and then everything just like went in the doldrums. Ethereum hit like, I think it was like $80 in 2019. So it was not a good time for raising money for a cryptocurrency startup, because everybody was down 95%.
Right.
But yeah, and then and we were just like starting in like December of 2019, really like we're like, all right, we're going, and then the pandemic hits it.
Oh, wow.
So then we just kind of hunkered down. But luckily DeFi and oracles really kind of caught wind, and we did okay just working remote, but
cool. And now you've grown, right? So you have people local, and you have remote employees. Is that right?
Yeah. So we've grown from the original 3 founders of Tellor up to now there's 12 employees.
Great.
So it's good. And so I think we're like half remote, half not remote. We actually had 2 guys who they lived in other parts of the country, and they just moved here to Frederick to work out of the office.
How did that come about? They just were looking for a change? Or?
Yeah, they're just like 2 single guys, and they're like, hey, do you want to get a room in Frederick?
Yeah. I guess after they had come probably for work.
Yeah, so we had brought them all out for like a Tellor week.
Really?
Back in October. We brought the whole team out, and from all over the U.S., and we had everyone here.
Did you take them around town and do anything fun? Anything in particular?
We did the escape room, of course. That's like the classic team building thing you got to do. And, Now I took them to all the restaurants and stuff. It was good. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. Do you have a vision for Tellor, like here in Frederick? Do you think about it as far as like you want to keep it here, you want to stay in Frederick, or any thoughts on that?
Yeah. No, I mean, we're not really looking to like expand that big. You know, it's one of those things where like the best kind of cryptocurrency company you can create is one that has like no employees. Yeah. Like it's just like software in a community that sort of maintains itself and runs. And that's kind of what, you know, so I think like this size team is really good, and, you know, maybe a few more, a few less. And, we just kind of want to make sure that like I'm staying here in Frederick. So I'm guessing that the company sort of will, but you know, hopefully like if Tellor becomes, you know, worth, you know, $10 billion, like it'll probably still be like five main employees, and like it's just that kind of thing, and that's what we want it to be.
Cool. So. One of the things you talked about, you just mentioned a word, and I've heard you use it a good bit, is community.
Sure.
And meaning even within your company with the software. So what does that mean to you when you say community in regards to Tellor?
Well, like, you know, Tellor is a cryptocurrency similar to like Ethereum or Bitcoin. Like you're ideally like Bitcoin is a software, but it's sort of more than that now. It's this community of people who are around Bitcoin, and that's what Bitcoin is when you think about it. You know, they're the people, whether it's the miners or the people who are the big time investors or just the local people who are trying to use it to buy something. Like that's like the community of Bitcoin, and that's what you're really trying to foster with it. You're not trying, you know, like if you're just a company who's growing for profit, you know, it's all about the bottom line. You don't necessarily care if it's one customer or 10 customers or something like that. But a cryptocurrency, it's much more, you know, it's about the vision and kind of that shared vision too. So, you know, like right now, like it's still a relatively tight-knit community since, you know, it's the founding team, and we sort of still steer everything in the path of decentralization. But, you know, as you saw, like with the early Bitcoin days, like there come decisions in the future of where you can choose between decentralization and not decentralization. You can get a request from the government to do something, and, you know, having a community that believes in sort of what we want to do.
So when you say community, does that also mean a form of governance, like decision making?
Sure. Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
Because like the way all of these things are, you know, we talk about like consensus driven. Right. You know, like if everyone running a Bitcoin node right now decided like JP Morgan has no Bitcoin, like if we know their address, like then guess what? JP Morgan doesn't have any Bitcoin. Yeah. Like you could just, it's just consensus. Yeah. Of course, they're probably not going to do that, but
there's some self-interest somewhere that would cross that up eventually.
Right, so, you could, and that's like, it's one of those things you want to make sure that your community is sort of fits with your vision on where things are going.
All right. So with you, you know, you already voiced, you know, it seems like you have an affinity for Frederick. You're sticking around here.
Yeah.
Why is that? You know, what is it you love about Frederick?
No, so I bought my first house in Frederick in 2015.
Okay.
So 7 years ago, lived here since 2013. Yeah, no, it's so I've lived here longer than anywhere I've ever lived in my life. So it's
putting down some roots.
Yeah, no, and now since
you've got a family.
Yeah, so I have three daughters now. So and they're all 5, 3, and 1, so super young. Yeah. So I'll be here for a while. Yep. No, I love the area. It's so we live out in Lake Ligonor, so it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's some things that Frederick's been known for over the years, and some newer things. You know, like whether it's the distilleries or the breweries, or one of the things I love is the outdoors. There's just so many, you know, cool things here with the outdoors. So is there anything in that realm that sticks out to you? It's like you really, really love about the place.
Yeah, I mean, I love hiking in a lot of places.
Oh, really? So, okay. Like hiking, backpacking.
Yeah, I used to do a lot more distance running.
Okay.
So, Sugarloaf Mountain's probably like my favorite place to go.
Oh, nice.
I don't know if you ever go there, but
I haven't. I mean, it seems like everybody's been there but me. I haven't been there yet.
Really?
Yeah.
It's like a 10-minute drive.
I know. But I'm like 5 minutes from, well, I know it's not the same thing, but I'm like the watershed, Frederick Watershed. I spend a lot of time running up there. So, yeah.
No, it's like, if you start, it's like a nice 2-mile run up to the top.
Okay. Cool.
You can, so I used to live like my old house, like I could run to Sugarloaf Mountain.
Really?
So it was.
That's amazing.
It was like a 10-mile run to the top and back, but like I did a lot of distance running, so like I loved that area.
Cool.
And then and now we'll just occasionally drive down there with the girls. But
well, running is definitely a passion of mine, so we'll be interviewing some people in regards to some running stuff. So you have to keep an eye on that. But yeah, that's really cool. Yeah. Any other like hobbies or anything you're doing?
Yeah, so I think I told you in the past. So now I'm not running as much. I got into the Frederick, Maryland Arm Wrestling Club.
Yeah, the Frederick, Maryland Arm Wrestling Club.
Yeah, it was fun. So
this is a real thing.
It is a real thing. It's a Facebook group. I guess that makes it a real thing.
So okay. So how did this come about? Like,
I don't know. Like I watched some videos on arm wrestling, and I was like, "Man, this would be fun."
And then you like just searched around.
And then I looked at it, and there was like a Facebook group popped up, and it's like a Russian guy with some arm wrestling tables in his basement.
I'm trying to picture what this is like.
Yeah.
So is it like?
No, it's just at his house.
Right, but is it like every Thursday night, or it's on weekends, or you know?
Yeah, so Sundays at 10.
Okay, so you go Sundays, and you go in. Is it like a big, nasty, brawly crowd with like drinking and there's smoke and you can't? Or is it is it real reserved? Or like what happens?
Like some guys are more burly and like blue collar, but then like half the guys are probably software developers.
Okay, yeah.
So like you don't really talk about work or anything.
Okay, but is it like it's just everybody just kind of real casual,
well, it's
people
like
hanging out?
So
okay,
so like whenever you're arm wrestling, like it's you arm
wrestle.
Well, yeah,
when you're arm wrestling, it's intense.
Yeah, so you arm wrestle for an hour. It's like a phenomenal workout that you just got for your arms. So
is it kind of like you have this big long table and people kind of trade off?
No, so they're like the official ones,
like a mini tournament kind of thing.
The pads and the pegs.
But if there's like 10 guys there,
you take
is turns. It kind of like okay?
Yeah, well,
and that day you kind of work through, and you have a winner. You have a winner that day or something.
No.
Okay.
Usually you just like rotate, and everyone. It's very, like I guess very friendly,
communal, and like you're maybe teaching each other technique.
Yeah, so when I went, like they taught me how to do it, and then they'll teach other people.
Wow.
And it's super fun.
It's pretty outgoing to just go, huh? I'll try it. Sure. She'll show up.
Sure.
So how'd it go your first time?
No, it went well my first time. Yeah, I mean there were some other beginners. There was like another first timer there.
So you're like sizing people up, like, hey, why don't we try this out?
No, and luckily I'm like a decent sized guy, so I'm not
right.
not too small to begin with. And then, but and so after the first time though, I just remember like I couldn't pick up anything for 2 weeks. It was like
a little sore.
Yeah, it's like the weirdest soreness in the world. So you'll like not be able to move.
I just I don't know if you watch Lex Friedman.
Yeah, Devin Lehrert was.
Did you see? Yeah, he interviewed. See, I don't know this guy, but he interviewed this guy that does arm wrestling.
One of the top guys in the world. So he's awesome.
It was again like anything like that. Even though I'm not into it, to hear that guy talk about it was amazing because he's talking about all his technique and how. Moving your arm certain ways.
Yeah.
It's always like very small movements that gain advantage.
For sure. Yeah.
Really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and he's been doing it for 30 years now. Yeah. It's like absurd.
Yeah.
Been doing it for.
So you knew that guy. He's famous. He's really famous.
He was number one in the world for a decade. So.
Yeah. Okay, so you're gonna keep doing the arm wrestling thing?
Yeah, hopefully, at the sake of
until
my distance
running.
running.
Hopefully you don't mess anything.
Well, no, it was I think it was the second time I was at the arm wrestling practice. Like one guy was doing it and his forearm snapped.
What?
The bone, yeah, and he passed out, and then,
Whoa, his forearm snapped.
Yeah, and it came back, and it was which is actually a really, really rare injury in arm wrestling. Like usually your tendons will give out, but you if you know how to arm wrestle, that won't happen. Like you.
Oh, really? He just did the wrong kind of thing, or what?
Yeah. Well, you can just imagine so this is safe. Like this is not natural for your arm.
That's
so
bad
stay like facing and stay square.
So this was at this dude's house?
Yeah, this dude's house.
So this guy's arm snapped.
Yeah, it snapped.
And was everybody just like,
luckily no bones came out, but everyone was like, this. and then we all just stood, and he passed out for a few seconds, and then the ambulance came, and then he was and then the ambulance came and was like, all right, it's just a broken forearm, we'll get you in the ambulance, and some of the other guys, they were like, no way are we letting him get in that ambulance. We're driving him to the hospital. It's like, don't worry, man. We're not letting you pay for this ambulance.
Oh, wow.
And 2 other guys like carried him and put him in their car
Wow.
and drove him. And it was like, it was a good little thing.
Did they do anything to his arm before he took him? Like, did they straighten it out or anything?
No, I think it was like, they just brought him in. It was just an arm in there.
Oh, I'm tensing up. You're just telling the story. I'm like, oh, man.
But that was like my second time. And I was
that was
like,
your second
man,
time. And was everybody like, oh, once every 4 weeks or so, it just happens?
Yeah, no, there hasn't really been an injury since. It was just like,
I mean, occasionally that is going to happen, I guess. Like, if like enough people do it enough, that's going to happen. But it's rare, I guess. It's not
it's
like
super.
common.
It was super rare.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
apparently,
that's terrible.
But yeah.
So is that dude like? Is he like shown back up?
Yeah, no, he's fine now. He came out like the next week in a cast.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's pretty wild. So are you like a beer, wine, bourbon guy? Any of those things in particular?
Nah, cheap scotch.
Cheap scotch.
Yeah.
All right.
Got into brandy whenever the cheap
I don't think there's a
was
cheap
too
scotch
pricey.
distillery in Frederick, so I'll have to work on that one.
Yeah, no, I'll drink whatever.
Yeah.
It's good.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, Nick, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge. It's been like a really fun conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah, I've learned so much by talking with you. Hopefully everybody listening and watching will as well. So
yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Anytime you want to talk. So.
All right. Yeah, maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Cool.
All right. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope it gave you a new insight into the talents, passions, and curiosities from Frederick, Maryland, and beyond. If you did, maybe you can help me out a bit. The best way for the show to grow in its reach is for you, the audience, to subscribe, like, and share this episode with your friends. Much appreciated. Until next time.